Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hey, everybody. I am here today joined by my good Exodus friend, Dr.
Yay.
Catherine Sophia Bell. Today we're talking about the magic of quitting, of telling
Yes.
yourself, this is it, I've had enough. This is a
Done.
good place to end this thing that I'm in. And so I'm very like our guest today is going to inspire us, and she's probably going to light a little fire under some of you who are, in the in between. I don't know what to do phase. So, Dr. Bell, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Catherine Sophia Bell. I am founder of La Bellevue Academy, where I offer special programming and signature programs for high achievers, happily unmarried, and erotic empowerment. I often say I live at the intersections of those three things. And the interesting thing is, if you are a high achiever, you're so goal oriented and achievement oriented that sometimes it's harder to make that decision to quit. So, reframing what quitting looks like may be helpful for the high achievers out there.
I kind of just want to start there. What does quitting look like to you?
So for me, it's a matter of discontinuing things that do not spark joy for me anymore, that do not give me pleasure anymore, things that are energetically draining for me, things that are stressing me out, things that just get on my nerves, that are just past their prime, the doors to do the thing that I actually want to do. So sometimes I say you have to give a sacred no to things that are depleting you so that you can embrace your sacred yes for what you really want to do.
Okay, y'all. Wait, sacred no's and sacred yeses. I'm loving this.
Yeah,
I'm loving this. Um, you quit your job recently.
I did. I quit. I've become a kind of master quitter. I'm very successful at quitting things that don't work for me. And so for me, that has included quitting a 17-year marriage that I was in for far too long, but I did exit when I felt ready to exit. And more recently, quitting a career as a philosophy professor of 20 years. So I earned my PhD in 2003. I went through got tenure. I got promoted to associate professor. I was about to go up for the next promotion to full professor. I would have successfully been promoted to full professor if I'd actually chosen to go up. But I reached a place where I was just like, no, this is not it anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. And so I quit right before my next promotion and before like a paid sabbatical leave. I had a paid administrative leave. And for me, the peace of mind that I have here on the other side of quitting is worth so much more money than any money I would have gotten from taking a paid administrative leave from the university. So yeah, it's like reassessing what's more valuable for you. And for me, it was time, it was peace of mind, it was less stress, and really feeling aligned, right? Like so, I for me that I was no longer aligned with working for the university in the way that I had been. So I quit. I liberated myself.
So I don't know a lot about academia, but I do know that y'all be like, I got to get tenure. I got to get
Right.
tenure. And
Tenure
then,
is a
like,
major thing.
right? You got to get tenure, and then you get tenure, and then you could stay there forever. So,
You can
you
stay
can't be
forever.
fired, right? When you
Right.
get tenure.
I mean, you can technically, but it's really hard. Like once you get tenured, it's really hard to fire you. And what's interesting is like when I decided to quit and I told people kind of in my inner circle and then my broader circle, every woman, especially every Black woman in my life was like, yes, congratulations. I'm so proud of you. Like you were Harriet Tubman, come get the rest of us. Don't leave us here. And there were two men in my life who were in the academy who were like, you mean you're going to leave behind job for life? And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. Like I
Mhm,
don't need a lifetime sentence to this institutional
mhm.
structure. I will be liberating myself from this institutional bondage. But yeah, tenure is a major thing. And I think especially now in the academy, because there are fewer and fewer tenure track and tenured positions available, they're really going the route of like adjunct professors and just faculty who don't have as much like stability and job security, frankly, within the institutional structure. So they're hiring more kind of temporary faculty or people who don't have that secured tenure line. So the idea is like they kind of they foster a scarcity mentality of like there are only so many tenure track jobs, there are only so many faculty with tenure, so you have to fight for all your might in order to get it. And once you get it, you better hold on to it. And I was just like, this is not something that I want to hold on to. So yeah, I gave up a tenured faculty position. Now, having said that, you know, being a high achiever, as most Black women are, if I decided to step back into it, there would be multiple universities who would be happy to hire me with tenure again. So it's not something that I could not come back to if I did not want to. Do I think I'll be coming back to it? Probably not, but yeah, it is true. Like once you have tenure, and this is actually in the K through 12 education system too. They do have tenure for teachers in K through 12 public education too. Because my mother worked in public education. She was a attorney and like helped negotiate contracts for teachers and things like that. So they do have a tenure system in that in the K through 12 as well.
So often we high achievers get to where they've been trying to go in their career and they realize it ain't all that. Like
that
this
part
is not what this is what
yes.
I've been working, you know, 10, 15, 20 years for, and I'm here and I don't like it. But to your point earlier, in our society, it's so hard. We're giving these messages that like, now that you tried to get here, now that you're here, you can't walk away. And that may even be an internal message because we've worked for so long, like we've invested so much. For me, I went to law school, I passed the bar, I worked so long in my career to specialize. But I wasn't happy, right? And doing it longer wasn't going to make me happier. Like at a certain point, I realized that getting to the next level isn't going.
There was not going to be more satisfaction, right? It's more of the stuff that you don't like now,
right?
It's more the same.
Oh, I get to do this for the rest of my life. Yay.
Yeah. And it was just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And I can remember sitting in department meetings with faculty who were like, you know, 10, 20, 30 years my senior, thinking like, this is not the life that I want for myself. Like, I do not want to be you when I grow up. Like, I want to be the opposite of you when I grow up. And for me, it was a matter of assessing, because I'm a philosopher, I do a lot of kind of internal, existential, reflective work. And so for me, it was a matter of like, okay, what are the things about this work, you know, the work that I want to do, the sense of purpose that I have, like, you know, I love reading, I love writing, I love researching and things like that. Because I basically got compensated to do that kind of work. But then it got to a place where all of the other jobs that were expected of me within that title began to take away from the thing that I actually loved about it. And so I realized like, oh, I don't actually need to be a philosophy professor. I don't need to be working for a university to read and write and speak and coach and do the things that I love doing. So like I assess what are the things I love about what I do and how can I do that outside of this institutional structure and the bondage that has come along with it.
Okay. And where did you land on that? How can you do the things you love to do in a different context?
I mean, I can do it on my own time and in my own space, right? And without the same kinds of distractions, right? And so I was still able to be very prolific. Like I wrote 2 books, I edited a book, I wrote a bunch of articles, book chapters, things like that. So I was still able to write a lot even within the constraints of having a university professor position, but it was time to write and setting, you know, trying to find time to write because so much time was taken up with meetings and committees and emails and all of this other kind of stuff that I was doing. So it was like, okay, how can I eliminate that stuff to focus on what I want to do? And for me, that also looked like saving money and stacking some cash so that I could walk away, give myself a bit of a cushion for some break, and then see how I wanted to kind of transition into other things. But I will say I also had already started my coaching business like 10 years ago, right? So I knew that I had something to transition into once I transitioned out of the academy. So I started my own academy, basically.
So this is where I come in and I say to the sweet, sweet lady, because she knows I say it all the time. Almost every time I talk to her, I tell her, this is not a break. This does not sound like a break. But that's something we talked about briefly before we got on here, is that people who are used to doing and like making it to the next step over and over and over, it's hard for them to say like, I'm just going to sit down and chill.
And
Y'all,
do
okay,
nothing. Yeah.
I'm gonna give away her business real quick.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Even when she was planning her sabbatical, she was like, okay, so I'm gonna go here and research and write. And I was like, isn't that what you do for work?
That's not a
Like,
break. Exactly. Exactly.
your break is more of what you do
Exactly.
for work. Like, and I understand how outside of the confines of the university, right, it might feel like a break, but the idea of just stopping
altogether.
work and not
Yeah.
doing any of the things that you do for work. No, she was
Right.
struggling with that. Struggling.
I was. And I think the medium that I found, or the compromise that I found, and I've said this like in some of the Facebook groups, and like I thought the switch, because I was like, okay, my last day at the university is June 30th. I'm taking 6 months from July to December, and I'm not doing anything. And what I thought was going to be a switch has turned out to be more of a dial. So like I'm having to kind of turn down things to transition into like actually not doing anything. Right. And so part of it is like doing the online self-paced courses. I've been thinking about and wanting to do that for a long time, and I just never had the time or the bandwidth to like get that content up to onto the platforms to do that. And so now that I'm not working anymore with the university, it's like, okay, I actually have some space and time to get that content up and let it do what it does, instead of doing that more hands-on, one-on-one stuff that I had been doing before that. So the goal of the online self-paced courses is to kind of provide coaching in a course with me, where I'm not actually doing the hands-on coaching in the self-paced programs. And then I'll pick back up that coaching in 2024. So I am turning it down and easing into like, okay, let me get this content up on these courses from my academy, and then I can kind of transition out. And I still have one, but again, like this is the stuff that pops up. So you have to be vigilant and protecting your time. So I was like, I'm going to be done. Then I'd agreed to write a tenure letter for somebody, which I wasn't able to finish by June 30th, but I got that done like July 15th. And then I was just asked to write another tenure letter for somebody whom I've written for before. So I agreed to do that. But now I'm like, okay, but that's it. So I'm not taking on anything else. And I'm definitely dialing it back to transition into a fuller. So I would say by end of September, I will be fully transitioned out of working. And happily unmarried in September, and erotic empowerment in October, in terms of just launching, getting that content up. But then I don't have any commitments after that, work commitments.
Okay. Let's talk about what happily unmarried, where that came from.
So for me, it was a way of reframing for myself as well as for my children, the process of getting divorced, or what I call delightfully divorced. So a lot of times when we look at people who are getting divorced, it's like doom and gloom. It's like, oh, this, I'm supposed to be bitter, I'm supposed to be angry, and all of these kind of things. And for me, getting a divorce was not this depressive, embittered process. It was like I was unhappily married, and now I'm happily unmarried. And so it gave me a way of framing what my experience actually was. And it gave me some language to give the kids for what the process was. Like, we were together, we're not together anymore. We are now having, like my youngest at the time was like maybe 5 or something like that, and was like, oh yeah, I get that. Like, y'all were married and now you're happily unmarried. Like, it was language that totally made sense once it was introduced in that way. So for me, again, it was a way of providing language for myself as well as for my kids, for what that process was, without all of the kind of stigma and negative things associated with divorce. And again, I think for high achievers, a lot of times we stay in marriages too long because we're like, we're going to meet that goal. We're going to stay in it. We're going to make it work. And you get this sunken cost bias where like you keep putting into something, but you're not actually getting anything out of it. And so for me, I often say I didn't fail at marriage. I succeeded at getting happily unmarried.
Okay. I mean, I really like the way you phrase things and the way you talk about the big changes in your life that are sometimes really scary for people. But to your point, if you can put the words to it that are accurate and less scary, right?
Yeah.
And that really reflect your experience, it doesn't have to be the super negative thing.
Right.
And your kids, she got kids. Tell us about your kids.
I have 4 kids. So my oldest is 22. He is now officially launched. So he has moved out of the house. He has his own place. He has a full-time job with benefits. The 20-year-old finished high school early and college early. So she's staying with my sister out in California for the summer. And then she's starting a master's program in the fall in Ireland. And then I have the two younger kids. These are all from the marriage. And then the two younger kids are 14 and 11. And so they are now about to start middle school and high school this year. But we've transitioned where they have gone from living with me full time to being with their dad full time. So they've been with him all summer. I'm actually been this weekend, and they'll be starting school, in like 10 days or so. But they'll be with their dad during the school year. So this is the first time in, like, I'm 45 years old. My oldest is 22. So literally half of my life I have been mothering. And so this is the first time in 22 years that I am not the solo parent, the primary parent, the person who is doing all the things for the children. And so it's been very liberating. It's been like, I feel so much lighter, like even in anticipation of back to school. Like I was the one doing, a lot of times my sister would do, she was really my co-parent. She was doing all the back to school shopping. She does all the Christmas shopping, right? Like she's the cool auntie in terms of like getting clothes and stuff like that. I was doing the school supplies and all of that kind of stuff. So this is the first year where I'm like, oh, I'm not the person that's not all falling on me to do all of those things, which gives me just different energy and freedom of movement.
Okay. I don't know your social circles, but I can imagine as a Black woman, there were people in your life who had a hard time with that decision that you made.
Yeah.
So what did that look like?
Well, first of all, I am people. It was a hard decision for me to make. So it literally took me like 2 years to wrap my mind around, like, this is okay to do, right? Like, this is like, it's not necessarily ideal. Like, I recognize that their father and I have very different world philosophies. We have very different parenting philosophies, right? And so we're having to negotiate, what does that look like? It's not necessarily easy for them, but I knew for me, like, I'd reached a point where, like, I just felt like I was drowning. I was overwhelmed. It was too much. And it was just like, okay, even though it may not be ideal for me, for them to be with their dad, it's also not ideal for them to be with me. And I'm stressed out and I'm spread too thin and I have too much stuff going on. So counseling, 2 years of coaching, and like wrapping my mind around, like, it's okay to do this for myself. And also, like, they have a whole other parent who also can show up and do the things. Like, will he show up like me? No, right? Is he going to parent like me? No, but they're not in danger, right? Like, that was my therapist was like, okay, they're not in physical danger, right? Like, you need to know, and they need to know, everybody doesn't love you like your mama, and that's okay. But they will still get, their needs will still be met, and you very much need this break. So it's okay to take this break. And so it took me like 2 years to wrap my mind around that and be okay with that. Now, interestingly, I think there are some people who are like, oh, I could never do that. And there are other people who are like, girl, teach me your ways. Because why? I mean, we know why the expectation is that women do all of that labor, but like, if there is a at least competent father who, again, is not going to harm them, even if he's not going to do the same. Okay. Yeah, they'll be okay.
Yeah. And he doesn't have 4 in the house. He's got 2 in the house, right?
He has just 2, right? They literally, all 4 of them with me solo. And he just has the 2 younger ones. And they're at an age where, well, there's a couple of things. Like, they're at an age where I am really confident and comfortable with, and this has been part of my mantra, like, I trust what I have put into them up to this point, right? Like, they're not 5 years old, they're not 8 years old, right? At this point, they're 11 and 14. So I trust what I've put into them, and I trust who they are as people, right? Like, a lot of times I think we think kids are just going to go with whatever the adult is in the space. But, we come here as fully formed humans, and we're growing into who we are, and we are who we are, regardless of, influences certainly do play a role. But, I'm confident that the kids are who they are, and they're going to be who they need to be, whether they're in their dad's house or whether they're in my house. Right. And so I've gotten to a place where I'm like, I for my children, even if they're not in my direct care.
Okay. I don't want to get too far in his business, but what was this how was the transition for him? Was this like a hard conversation, or Was it,
No,
did it go
not
okay?
necessarily. I mean, the fact of the matter is he has a much better support system, right, in terms of
Mhm.
caring for kids, right? So he moved back to his hometown where he's from. So at this point, like he's remarried. So there's a whole other adult in the house to help out who, the lion's share of that labor is probably falling on, right? His parents are still living and they live close to the parents. So even when I came to visit them, I picked them up from their grandparents' house, right? Because he dropped them off at the grandparents' house, right? And so that, like, I mean, I have my mom and my sister, but at one point I was living in Pennsylvania. My sister lives in California. My mother lives in North Carolina. So whenever I was needing to travel or something like that, it meant my sister was flying across the country or my mom that support because they didn't live in the same town as me, whereas their dad is situated where he's in his hometown. So if he travels, he has a sister who's in town who's like, her kids are in college now, so she could come and take care of them while he does whatever. And so he just has a different kind of network and support system. And so it's just like, okay, why am I trying to do everything solo when he has a whole support system in place for, him to do what he still needs to do and have other people as backup for the kids.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good though. Like, I feel like that's, you didn't quit your kids, but I feel like we can add that to the category of things that like,
Yeah, well, releasing the idea that I could be the only parental
yes.
figure or the solo, and like I had to be the solo and primary parental figure
Mhm.
for my kids. Like releasing that was definitely a thing that was very important. Yeah.
Was there any ego attached to that?
I think there is definitely ego, because just like I'm the superior parent, I'm the better, whatever. And it's like, yes, and you're spread too thin right now. You're doing too much. You're stressed out, and this is not sustainable. Like I just got to a place where I was like, this is just not sustainable long term, and I can't necessarily show up as my best self for them if I'm depleted and I have no energy and I'm exhausted all the time.
Okay. All right. We've talked about the job, which I want to get back to.
Yeah.
The marriage, the kids. You quit your location too.
I totally quit my location. So I was living in central Pennsylvania. I was working at a university in central Pennsylvania, really small college town. And it served its purpose, right? Like it was an okay place to like raise kids, everything, it wasn't a lot of traffic, easy to get around. But I grew up moving around a lot. And so years. Like that was the longest that I had ever lived anywhere, was like 15 consecutive years. And I was like so ready to get out of there for so many reasons. And so it just turned out like the timing aligned perfectly where it was like, okay, 20 years since I got my PhD, 15 years since I got to State College, Pennsylvania, which is where I was living. Again, the oldest had launched and had his old place, the 22-year-old. The 20-year-old is about to start graduate school. And the younger two kids were in a transition point, again, going into middle school and going into high school. So it was just a wonderful breaking point for everything for major transitions across the board. But yeah, continuing to live in the small college town was not an option for me. So I opted to move to Savannah, Georgia, where I've never lived, where I don't know anybody. I mean, I know a couple of people. But it just felt good and felt right. Like it felt good to make a decision where it was like, this just feels good and feels right. And I remember talking to one of my best friends because I was talking to and I spent a lot of time in Atlanta between college and conferences and again, research. Like there are archives in Atlanta that I go to all the time. So I was thinking about getting a house in Atlanta or getting something in Savannah. And so I was talking to my friend and I said, I really want a place in Savannah, but I'm looking at Atlanta because it makes more sense for these reasons. And she's like, listen, if you want a house in Savannah, buy a house in Savannah, right? Like it's so simple, but not necessarily easy.
Mhm.
And so it was just like, yeah, I want like where I want to live is Savannah. Atlanta's right there. I can get to Atlanta whenever I want to get to Atlanta, whether I fly over there or drive. It's like a 4-hour drive. So yeah, I decided I want to move to Savannah just because I like it and it's pretty. I like the architecture. I love the huge trees. I love the Spanish moss. I love the restaurants. I love the culture. So yeah, I quit my location and moved to Savannah.
Okay. One of it, she moved to Savannah, but she gonna be in the streets this what, fall, spring?
Yeah, I'm going like I've been to Atlanta already. So again, this is empowerment stuff. I'm into like the Black kink and BDSM communities, and a lot of that stuff happens to be in Atlanta. So I go to Atlanta for those kinds of events all the time. I'm with the kids this weekend. I'm going to, I was just in North Carolina. I was in like North Carolina and in DC like 2 weeks ago. I'm going to Curacao next weekend, actually for a divorce party. So I'm excited about that.
Ooh.
There's another person who's done the happily unmarried thing again after like 20 years. And she was just like, yeah, I'm done. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, I support that 100%. So she's having a party in Curacao. So I'll be there next weekend for like a 4-day weekend. And then after that, I'm going to Scotland. And there I'm giving a keynote address. So that is work related. And then I tagged on a trip to Amsterdam for the Scotland trip since I'm going to be there anyway. Flight from Amsterdam, so I didn't have any layovers. And I mean from Aberdeen in Scotland. So I didn't have any layovers. So I landed on Amsterdam. I mean, you can get to like Dublin, London, Paris, and Amsterdam, I think, directly from Aberdeen, but I've been to all the other places. Well, I haven't been to, I've laid over in Dublin, but my daughter's about to be in Ireland. So I was like, I'm going to be in Ireland anyway. So I landed on Amsterdam because I haven't been there, but I've been everywhere else that has a direct flight from Aberdeen. So yeah.
And then Germany?
Oh, Germany, yes.
But wait, let's not talk about Germany. Let's
Okay, let's hold on.
I want to talk, yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to Catherine today is because she's a prime example of how, like you said earlier, when you say those sacred no's, you make room for the sacred yeses.
For the sacred yes.
And Germany is the way we got to Germany. I'll start this story. I'm going to tell you the story of her life, but I'm going to start it with when she was talking about taking a sabbatical. She was like, I think I want to go to Berlin, right? It was Berlin.
Yeah, it was Berlin. Right. For Audre Lorde, because I'm working on 2 Audre Lorde books. Yeah.
So her sabbatical was going to Berlin to work on her book.
To research, right? Okay, and you were like, girl, that's not a break.
No. So Catherine is part of my From Burnout to Bliss program. So every time we get together for group coaching, I'd be like, so now what does your break look like?
Right. What's the break again?
Where's the relaxing and the like not working? Because I can't find it.
I don't see it. Where is it? Yeah.
All right. So that was the initial plan. And then tell us what's happening now.
So that was last summer. So I was like, okay, I want to take off at least a month. I was going to take off the month of July. I was going to try to go to Berlin. And then you were like, girl, that's not a break. That is work and research. And so I was like, okay, you're right. So then I decided to hold, I was like, okay, Germany's not going anywhere. I can get to Germany another time. So I decided to do Mexico because Exodus Summit was already going to be in Cancun. And there's a whole crew in Playa del Carmen. And then you're in Mexico City. So that's what I did for July last summer. I started in Cancun and did Playa del Carmen and then did Mexico City. But Germany was still kind of percolating and on my mind. So the way I ended up getting now, I am going to Germany. I'll be there for 6 months starting in 2024 after my sabbatical, is that I quit my job. And there was a woman, she had been a speaker for, like, I was running this center called the African Research Center in my previous position. And so she had been a speaker like last year for an event that I did. So that's how we initially connected. We connected on social media. So when I officially resigned from my position, I announced it on March 1st, even though the date wasn't until June 30th. But I will email and social media blasted, like, I quit my job. I took pictures with a candle that said I quit, all of these things. It was a whole wonderful production. And then a few weeks later, Can you hear me when my face goes away?
You broke up. No, you break up for a second or two. So you said you took photos of a candle. Yeah, I quit candle.
Yeah, I quit candle. And so she reached out to me on social media. And so she said, I saw you quit your job, but I'm about to start this program. And I really had you in mind. Like, I really would like for you to apply for this program. Are you still open to doing that? Or are you like done with the academy altogether? And so I said, oh no, I'm still open to doing that. Like, I still love to read. I still love to write. I still love to do research. I just didn't want all of the other stuff. So like a fellowship would be perfect. So she sent me all the information. So I applied to this fellowship. And so basically I was offered this fellowship. So I could have done it. It was actually a 1-year fellowship. Like, they have 3 terms in the European system. So there's like a fall term and then 2, like a winter term and then a spring term. But I opted not to do the fall term because I was like, I'm supposed to. for my face to come out. So I didn't take the spring term, but I didn't take the fall term, but I did take the spring term and the winter term. So basically I will be in Germany from January until June of 2024. And listen, y'all, like, it's like all the things. So it's full, like they provide an apartment, like a real cute, like high ceilings, high-end new fixtures, floor to ceiling windows, like apartment. It provides meals like breakfast and lunch every day. I think I may be on my own for dinner. And then like the Institute, like everything's on one block. So it's like the Institute is one building and then the apartments are literally the neighbors to the Institute. So it's like a 3-minute commute from your apartment to the Institute, where you have like office space. So it's basically just space, room to breathe, room to read, room to write. But it's like my accommodations are provided and my meals are provided. So I'm happy to have accommodations and meal provided and focus on my research, which is exactly what I want to do.
And flights?
And flights, yes, girl. So they provide the flights. So this is the story about so they flew me out for the interview. What they called it, like a workshop. So you came in to workshop, like whatever it is you wanted to work on. And so they initially sent out, they said, well, you can make your flight arrangements and we'll reimburse you. So I went to book my flight and it was already kind of pricey, I thought, for Germany, right? But it's Hamburg, it's not Berlin. So it was like maybe $3,000 or $4,000 for the flight, just for like the regular flight. Then they sent a follow-up email and they said, well, if your flight is over 7 hours, then you can fly business class. And so that flight was like $7,000. And I've never spent that much money on an airplane ticket. And so I had a moment where I was like, this is crazy. Like, this seems ridiculous to be spending like 7 G's on a plane ticket. But then I had like, so that was a moment for me to see like, okay, you want to be able to have ease, to have pleasure, to have some luxury. And here's a fellowship that's like, we want to give you all of these things. And so like, but I had to have a conversation with myself and like book that business class ticket when like, why am I worried about their pocketbook? Like they know how much money they have in their budget. They would not have offered to fly me business class if they could not afford to fly me business class. So yeah, I got a business class ticket and it's the same thing for the fellowship. So when I fly back, they'll basically provide another business class round trip ticket for the fellowship when I go out there in January. So yeah, so it's amazing. It's pretty much like if I could have written, this is what I want to do, you know, on somebody else's dime, right? Like this would be it. So it totally like, it was like, once I quit the thing that I didn't want to do, it really made room for me to draw in the things that I really wanted to do.
Because I mean, this may have happened if you hadn't quit, but it may not have, right? Or you may not have had the space to do it, but everything has aligned in this way for you to do the thing you want to do on someone else's dime.
Yes.
So you will have time on that somewhere in that experience to go to Berlin and do some of the odd.
Yes, for sure. So the schedule is pretty flexible there. So it's literally like, they're like, we just want to provide a space for you to like contemplate and write and read and do your research and do whatever you want to do. So they're like, it's a very flexible thing, but you know how the train systems work there. It's very easy to get in and out of other places. So I'll definitely make a few research trips to Berlin while I'm in Hamburg. And yes, I'm excited about it. And the theme of it is like, it's a Black feminist theme, intersectionality theme. So it's like, they're literally bringing in like the top Black feminist intersectional scholars from like literally from around the world, right? Like it's like US based people from the continent and Africa, like, I mean, some people based in Europe. So it's going to be exciting. It's like I think it'll just be a beautiful space to be in, to do the kind of work that I'm doing, right? Because you can kind of, you know, bounce ideas off of it. So it's a beautiful, like, intellectual community to be doing the work that I'm doing.
Okay. We're so happy for you. Like this is such a huge win in a way that, in an unexpected way, right? And the way you had everything lined up, because you planned on taking a sabbatical, and then you were like,
yes,
we should talk about why you didn't take the sabbatical in a second.
Yes.
But the way it was like, you stepped out on faith. You took step one, and then everything else kind of was like, the doors open.
Everything else lined up. And it was a reminder, like that was my experience with exiting the marriage as well. It was like, it's one of those things that it's really scary on the front end of it. But then once you do it and get to the other side, it's like, why didn't I do this sooner? Like I could have done this so much sooner, but you do it when you're ready to do it, right? But because of that positive experience I had with my happily unmarried journey, like I could trust that lived experience and expertise along with my own intuition to know like, now is the time, like not in a year, not in in 2 years, but like now is the time to exit and trust that everything will line up and it will be fine. And it has totally been fine for me. More than fine. It's
It's
been
been more than
amazing.
fine. It's been more than fine.
Yeah.
It's been, everything is really, really like lined up. I mean, last summer, you were bouncing around, having a grand old time.
Yeah.
This year, you're ready to go.
Can I say something about last summer though? Last summer, like
Yes.
there is something that happens when you do take, like it's no turning back. Like once you take the break and you know what it feels like, it's like you can't go back to business as usual, right? So last summer I spent June in Atlanta. I was in the archives. I was in Audre Lorde's archives at Spelman. And that was, again, it was work, it was research, but I was like in my happy place. Like I went to Spelman College as an undergrad. So it was like a beautiful homecoming. I was literally staying on campus. I could walk to the archives, like from the apartment that I was in. And I still know a lot of people in Atlanta. So that was like, it was a beautiful time to just be in Atlanta and like have this kind of homecoming. And again, like the kids were with their dad. Like, so I was like dependent free last summer. And then I went from that to going to Germany. I mean, sorry, not Germany, to Mexico for the things we did in Mexico. And I came back home from Mexico, and then I still had like a trip to New York. I think I went 1 or 2 other places that summer. But once I came back where it was like, okay, everything was back to how it was before the summer, it was so hard to transition back. Like it was a rude awakening to go from like this fluid freedom, run the streets, do whatever you want to do, with like, oh my goodness, I have to show up for my job again. Oh my goodness, the back to school stuff. Like it was a really tough transition. And I remember calling my sister and I was like, I am not okay. Like I am really struggling. Like this is a hard transition. Like it was hard. And that was part of the reminder of like, this is sustain. Like it was going back to like I had been, sometimes when you're at this hurried pace, you're too tired to stop and pay attention to how exhausted you actually are. But then when you actually slow down, then it catches up to you of like, oh, this is too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think going from this like pace that was not sustainable to like really slowing down and taking a break, it was like, I would say my mind, my body, my spirit were like, no, we can't go back to business as usual. Like we can't go back to the pace that we were operating at. So last summer was like a preview of like, okay, once I take a break, coming back is just not going to be an option for me. And so that's the reason why I didn't take the sabbatical, is that I was like, if I had taken and you and I talked early on when we did like one of the one-on-one coaching sessions, and I was like, okay, here's my plan. Like I had a whole plan laid out for like, okay, if I take my sabbatical year, then I'll owe the university year. So you can take off a year and you can do like you can do a semester at full pay or a full year at like 70% pay or 80% pay or something like that. But if you take either the semester or the year, you owe the university a year when you get back. So I would have had to come back to my position for a year before I could quit. And so initially I was like, okay, well, I'll take the sabbatical year. I'll come back for a year, finish up my last year as the director of the center. And then I would have had 2 more semesters of administrative leave with like, that I could just take that I wouldn't have had to come back for. So initially I had like this 3-year plan. So I had a 3-year plan of like sabbatical, come back for a year, and then take these administrative semesters that I had. But I knew like there was no way I could come back after taking a year off. Like I was just like, I can't do it. So I didn't even apply. So I didn't apply for the promotion because I didn't apply for sabbatical because I knew I didn't want to come back. I didn't want to apply for the next promotion because that promotion process is also a full year. And I knew I wasn't going to be there to wait for, like, I knew it would have been a successful outcome, but like, it wasn't worth it for me. And then ultimately, I still had, I didn't do that last year, but because I wasn't doing the last year of the directorship, I was losing one of those administrative leaves, but I had negotiated for another administrative leave for a semester. And then once they knew that, I mean, they were just like, well, yeah, you can take the administrative leave, but you still have to do this and you still have to do that. And I was like, you know what? Y'all can keep that administrative leave because I'm not going to be doing this and doing that. So I decided to just walk away from the paid sabbatical and the paid administrative leave just for my own peace of mind to transition into doing what I really wanted to do.
And it's amazing. And one of the things I want to touch on is that we talk about sabbaticals and so many people say, oh, but like my job won't, like my career, my job won't give me a sabbatical. I either have to quit or leave. Mm-hmm. And it's like very few jobs will actually like offer sabbaticals, and professors, mm-hmm. right? Professors
right.
are
Professors
one of them.
have them. Yeah. Yeah, they do offer them.
But even then, right? Like
It's with strings attached. Yeah, it's with
it's a
strings
strings attached. It
attached.
may not be
Yeah.
that attractive. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, even though it sounds scary, often quitting, even without like a solid plan of like, this is my next job, quitting is often like the way to get out if you really want out, right? Like a
Right.
sabbatical. Because like you said, most people who take sabbaticals don't want to go back.
Right.
Unless like there's
Right.
like, I guess as a professor, if your sabbatical was for a reason, like I want time to work on my book, right? And you're
Mm-hmm.
working the whole time, then I could see it. But once you
Well,
take
that's the thing.
absolute
And
time off,
that's right. And so that's the thing at universities, the sabbatical, it's a misnomer, right? Because it's not time off, right?
right?
So you waiting for my picture to come back up. So you apply for a sabbatical, but you have to have some kind of project. So you're basically like, I want to take a sabbatical so that I can do this. I can write this book, or I can write these 4 articles, or I can do whatever project. And then that project gets approved for the sabbatical. And then when you come back, you have to write a report saying what you did. Like, did you do the thing that you said you were going to do? Right. So the sabbatical definitely has strings attached. Now, if you want to keep doing that job, it's fine, because it's like, oh, you're getting the time off from the teaching and the committee work and all of that other stuff to focus on the research. So like I'd taken a sabbatical previously when I went up for tenure. I had a sabbatical, and I've been really good at negotiating time off. So I've gotten a lot of semesters off or course reductions and things like that over the years. But at a certain point, like I kind of pivoted to a lot of different positions, and all of them were like not aligned. It was just like, this is just like, I've reached the end of this particular road in terms of being like a full-time professor.
Um, now that you're not at the university anymore, are there parts of your day to day that you miss, or parts of the
No.
job that you miss? No,
Not
nothing.
at all. Nothing, because again, the thing that I love doing, like I'm going to do anyway, right? Like the research, the writing, that kind of stuff I'm going to do. I think a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of fears, I think, for professors from leaving a job. I think there is this idea of a job for life, right? Like this kind of illusion of job security. I think a lot of people don't want to walk away from. But I think also a lot of people are scared of being disconnected from the intellectual community, right? Like, well, if I'm
Mhm.
not a professor anymore, will I still be connected to the intellectual community? But absolutely, like, it's not like I lost all my friends. Like most of my network is professors, right? Like, so I'm going to still be plugged in to intellect. So I'm definitely still plugged into intellectual communities. I can still go to conferences. I can still do all the kinds of things that I loved about my job without being a professor. And actually, oh, I am going to one other thing that you would say this is work, but it's not. This is a pleasure trip for me. So there's a 50th anniversary conference, a Phyllis Wheatley 50th anniversary conference. So 50 years ago, there was this conference that Audre Lorde organized with some other people in celebration of Phyllis Wheatley. And so it was like Sonia Sanchez, Alice Walker, Audre Lorde, all of these amazing people were there. So Audre Lorde has since passed, but like Sonia Sanchez is still with us. Alice Walker is still with us. So like all of them are going to be at this conference in Jackson, Mississippi in November. So I signed up to go to that conference, right? So that's a way for me to stay connected to the intellectual community I want to stay connected to. But because it's not a work conference for me, when I filled out the registration for it, like they ask you, what's your institutional affiliation? And so I was able to put, hold on. I'm waiting for my picture to pop.
We can hear
No.
you.
Oh, you can still hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was able to put La Bellevue Academy. So like I am my own institutional affiliation now, right? Which I love. So I didn't feel like, oh, I need to have this university affiliation in order for me to be valid or legitimate in this space, right? Like not working for the university does not erase the books that I've written or the articles that I've published or the book chapters that I've published, right? So I was able to put myself down as my own institutional affiliation. And then they asked if you wanted to present anything. And I said, no, because I'm not there to work. I'm not there to present my work. I'm there to like take in the brilliance of other people. So that's a pleasure conference for me, even though it's, it's an academic conference, but I'm not going to be presenting at that conference. So I'm looking forward. So all of that to say, like, I'm still connected. I'm still very much connected to my intellectual communities, even though I'm not a professor anymore. And again, nobody in my life is like, we don't want to talk to you anymore because you're not a professor anymore. They're like, give us the blueprint because we're right behind you.
Okay. Now, she's a little smile. You talked about pleasure.
Yes.
And you talked about La Bellevue Academy.
Yes.
let's talk about them together.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier you are involved in the kink community and a little bit of BDSM. Let's share with us whatever you want to share with us on that front.
Yes. So I love this so much. I'm somebody who, and this is like so many Black women's stories, right? You get raised in a church, you're socialized to like, shame associated with your body, shame associated with pleasure, shame associated with sex, sex is only for marriage and for the pleasure of like the man in the marriage. Like there are all of this kind of programming, socializing that happens. I think in society in general, that gets reinforced in particular kind of ways in the church. And like my mother was a minister or is a minister. So like that was very much the kind of community that I was raised in. And so I got married really young for that reason. I was 21 years old when I got married. I had my first kid when I was 22 years old, right? And a lot of that had to do with just the kind of Black church upbringing that I had. My body as I wasn't really connected to my body as a source of pleasure and I didn't enjoy sex in marriage, right? Like I think a lot of people think because I had 4 kids, like, oh, it must have been great. And it's like, no, I wanted 4 kids. Like I had 4 kids because I wanted 4 kids, not because the sex was amazing. And it's interesting to me, like for a long time, I thought, well, I just don't like sex, right? Like, because I'm a philosopher, I'm in my head a lot, I'm very cerebral. Maybe I just don't like sex. But it wasn't until I got happily unmarried and went on my erotic empowerment journey that I realized, and my sister, who's a medical doctor, right? Like, so I'm a PhD and she's an MD. So she's very science and data driven. So she was like, you don't know if you like sex, like you don't have a big enough sample size, like you haven't done it enough or with enough people.
Okay.
So her thing was like, you need to like get out there and have more experiences. And so once I had like amazing, pleasurable experiences, was like, oh, I actually love sex. I was just having sex with the wrong person. And so, so that was part of it. And so part of that journey was I went to a conference called Sex Down South, which happens in Atlanta. And so it's almost like an academic conference, but it's a sex education conference that an academic conference would have. So they have like your book exhibits with like all kinds of books around sex and kink and BDSM and things like that. They have like demos. And so that was like my entry point into that community of learning. And what I love about those communities is that they're very, very clear communication, very consent oriented, right? So you're going to have conversations around like, what are your yeses? What are your no's? What are your maybes? What are your hard no's? What are your soft no's? There's like safety words or like signals like, okay, red light, green light, yellow. Like red light means stop immediately. Yellow is like, slow down, let's check in. Green is like, keep it going. It's all good, right? Or you can have a number system in terms of like, your threshold for, sensation and things like that. So there's just a lot of emphasis on communication around respect and boundaries, around consent, that I think would be good for everybody, even if you weren't necessarily into kink and BDSM, but something that I find is like a core philosophy in Black kink and BDSM communities. So that's what attracted me to those communities.
Okay. Now, as part of your academy, you have a program called Erotic Empowerment, Embracing Ecstasy in 6 Stimulating Steps. Who was a good fit for that program?
I would say anybody who is really looking to having a more pleasure-centered life. So for me, erotic empowerment is also inspired by Audre Lorde. She has an essay called Uses of the Erotic. The Erotic is Power. And so for Audre Lorde, the erotic it's sensual stimulation and sexual stimulation, but it's also being connected to your creativity, being connected to your purpose, right? And so those things actually do go together. And like if you're not living a pleasure-centered life, I think it does actually stifle your creativity and how you're able to express yourself in the world. So erotic empowerment is good for people who are interested in learning more about like their bodies and pleasure, or giving themselves permission for pleasure. So I think a lot of times, again, we're raised to like stifle and push down our erotic empowerment, right? Like, or people siphon off that power for their own pleasure when we're not able to experience pleasure. And so if you really want to explore a more pleasure centered life, or like level up your pleasure centered life, I think it's for you. If you're somebody who's similar to me, who's like a high achiever, who was raised in a church, who was made to feel shame about your body or about physical pleasure and sensual and sexual pleasure, and you want to kind of get into and process some of the programming that you've received and kind of people who are either like at the beginning stages of like, okay, I do know I want more pleasure in my life, but I don't know quite how to get there. Or I have all of these negative stories that I've internalized around my body and pleasure. Or like I'm dipping my toe in, but I would like somebody to help me like really go more into the deep end, I think it would be good for all of those folks.
Okay, and that launches in October? That's not available
That
yet?
launches in October. Yeah, it's not available yet. So that the self-paced programs will be available in October. And I chose October because October is National Kink Month.
Who knew that? I didn't know that.
There you
Dr.
go.
Bell knows that. Dr. Bell knows that. She knows. What would you like us as an audience? I'm gonna pause for a second because I think those are your kids, right?
Yeah, my 14-year-old just popped in like, can I take a shower? He's like, I'm like, I appreciate him checking this. So y'all might hear the shower come on in the bathroom now. I was like, yeah, it's fine.
No, I was about to say something about kink, and I was like, let me wait until. What do you think would be helpful information, kind of from a general public, that you have learned on your journey in this space?
Yeah. So I would say it's important to like trust your intuition, right? But that can be hard to do when you're constantly living in the interest of other people or constantly putting everybody else before yourself. So there is a point at which you really do have to like connect to yourself and choose yourself and trust like that small voice or that inclination or just the desire of your heart. Like you don't have a desire in your heart if it's not meant for you to have what you desire, right? So like really trusting whatever pull or your intuitive like longings and going for that and trusting that like, you know, your gifts will make room for you. Everything will work out for your good. So first and foremost, I would say trust your intuition. I would say reflect on those bigger questions, like what's your sense of, or even like, again, your sacred yeses and sacred nos, like make a list of the things that you're doing, like in a given day, in a given week, in a given month, in a given semester or whatever, like what are the things you're doing and how much stuff on that list do you really hate doing or despise doing or don't enjoy doing, or they're like sucking. I think it's good to take inventory of your life and assess like, what are the things that are uplifting? What are the things that are energizing? What are the things that are making you feel good? And how do you invite more of that into your life? But also take inventory of what are the things that are stressing you out? What are the things that are making you sick? What are the things that have you, you know, exhausted and depleted? And how can you extract that stuff from your life, right? And so for me, it was important to pay attention to both. Like when I have really pleasurable experiences, I really itemize like, okay, what was it about this experience that was so amazing so that I can invite more of that energy into my life because I like what that feels like. And when I have an experience that, you know, is not great, then I'm like, okay, let me like, what was going on here that made this not great? And so how can I choose to say no to things that are going to be more energy depleting for me? But you can do it. And also quitting is, you can quit as a high achiever. Like I have a good friend who told me, she was like, even in quitting your job, you're like a high achiever at quitting your job. She's like, you're living your best life. You done bought yourself this house. My house has like all the colors in it. Like my old house, I always went like really, really neutral colors because I was like, well, resale value. So embracing you, like you can quit as a high achiever. And I think, you know, people who were helpful for showing us this just in the general public, like somebody like Simone Biles, when she's just like, you know what, this gymnastics thing is stressing me out and I'm going to take a pause. And she took some time away. She's about to come back now, but it's just like, she's at the top of her game and she's like, this is not feeling right for me, or I'm not feeling myself in this moment. So I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to quit. And if I want to come back, I will. And she's, you know, she's decided to come back. So just recognizing that quitting is not a sign of failure. It's sometimes it's a way of like choosing yourself. And again, giving that sacred no to things that are not working so you can give the sacred yes to what you really want to do.
Okay. Oh, someone, I know what I wanted to follow up with. Someone asked about the name of that conference and it was Sex Down South. Was that it?
Oh yes, Sex Down South. And it's in Atlanta. It's happening in September this year. So I've gone, I think the first time I went was 2018, the year after I got divorced. And beginner, whether you're a beginner or an expert, like there's something for everybody there. So it's a nice entry point to just learning more about, you know, again, sex education, sensuality, sexuality, all kinds of demonstrations and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sex Down South in Atlanta.
Sex Down South. I think you might be seeing some of the people watching right now.
Holler at me. I'll be there. I'm already registered. So if y'all are there, I'll see you there.
Okay. Now, also in your academy, let's talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
Your next program available, which is available sometime in August, later on this month?
Yeah, later in August. Yeah. I'm going to have a
Uh,
special offer on August 8th for it, but it'll be available later in August. Yeah.
that's your High Achievers program, High Achievers Success Strategies for Common Challenges?
Yes, yes. So something that I notice about high achievers is like, because I've worked with them over the last 20 years, whether as graduate students or, helping people go from assistant to associate or to full professor or administrators, but then also even not academics like attorneys, doctors, people who are executives, people who work like in government or other entrepreneurs. So I've worked with a lot of different kinds of high achievers, even though predominantly with professors. But I noticed in coaching one-on-one with high achievers, like there were very similar things that kept coming up with all of them. So basically, like I tracked what are the common challenges that are coming up for high achievers and what success strategies can I offer for those common challenges. So a lot of times it has to do with like being a high achiever. You're very competent at doing a lot of things, like we're good at a lot of different things. And then you end up getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And a lot of times you walk into the room and other people see how powerful and talented and skilled you are before you recognize that. And so people will like exploit and again, siphon off your skills and have you thinking that they're doing you a favor when you're actually the person who's running the show, right? And so it's like helping people to tap into, again, what is it that they really want to do so that they're not being pulled and manipulated in different directions by what other people want them to do. But a lot of it has to do with like, doing like a brain dump. Like a lot of times we keep a lot of things in our head, and I teach people how to like, okay, how do you get them out of your head and onto the page and then organize them in a way where you can kind of structure and be more intentional about what you're doing with your time, what you're doing with your energy. So we go through strategies for like a brain dump, strategies for what you want to eliminate, what you want to negotiate, what you want to delegate, what you want to defer. We go through strategies for creating like a 90-day plan, like a 3-month plan to execute what you really want to do. And then the more existential questions, like what are your wants? What are your needs? What are your boundaries? What are you avoiding, right? What are your fears, right? Because a lot of us, regardless of our track record, like you can have all the degrees and all the certifications and you've gotten all the promotions and you're still like, I don't know if I can do whatever the next thing is, as if you can't rely on what got you to this point to get to the next thing. And so really helping people see what their strengths are so that they can be more thoughtful and intentional about moving to that next phase and that next stage. Again, having clarity around the sacred yes and giving a sacred no to everything else that doesn't align with that sacred yes.
Okay. What made you want to create this program?
Again, seeing that like one-on-one, I was able to make a certain kind of impact by creating a self-paced program that more people can access. What are the core challenges for high achievers and offer success strategies that I know work because I've used them myself and I've seen them work with clients so that they have access to that. So it's like I said, it's a way of getting access to me as a coach, but through a course. And the good thing about the self-paced program, so when I was offering this live, it's like a multiple week commitment every week for a certain number of hours. With the self-paced program, you can kind of literally go at your own pace. You can go through it as quickly or as slowly as you need to kind of get through all of those steps to integrate the success strategies for the common challenges. So it was like, okay, how can I take everything that I've learned through my lived experience and expertise over the last 20 years and put that in a course that's accessible to more people?
Okay. Who's a good fit for that program?
I would say, and this is the interesting thing, I was going to say this is good for high achievers, but a lot of times high achievers are the main people who don't necessarily identify as high achievers, even though they're a high achiever. So you are a high achiever if you have ever set any kind of major goals in your life and you have actually planned out the steps to achieve that goal. So again, even though I've worked with a lot of PhDs and professors, you don't have to be a professor to be a high achiever. That's not a prerequisite for being in the program, even though that's who I've worked with the most, only because I'm a professor and that's those are the spaces that I was in. But if you're somebody who you're goal oriented, you're constantly like mapping out like what is your goal and how do you map out the steps for that goal and how do you go toward it, but you tend to get distracted or pulled in a lot of different directions, again because of what I sometimes call the curse of competence. Like when you're competent at anything, everybody's like, give it to that person, she'll do everything, right? And like you say yes to all the things because you're good at it and people give you praise for it even though it's not what you want to do. So if you're somebody who like you tend to be goal oriented and a planner, but you also want some added steps and resources for boundaries, for figuring out your sacred yes and sacred no, for plotting, you know, what you want your next steps to be that are your choice and not something that somebody else is kind of dictating to you, then I think it's a good fit for you.
Okay. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Yay.
What, of all the major changes that have happened in your life over the past 10 years, what do you think created the biggest shift internally?
Choosing me. Like, and recognizing that, like, I would say if I go down, the ship goes down, right? So like, if I don't choose me, if I don't say myself, like nobody else is coming to say like, are you okay? Are you good? Do you know, what can we do to help make your life easier, right? Because I was constantly the person that was making everybody else's life easier, right? And so at one point I was doing what I call focus on me tour. So whenever I had like a break from the kids, if they were with their dad for a week, or if my sister came for a week, or my mother came for a week, I would just go traveling to different cities, wherever I wanted to go, and just focus on me, lay around the house naked, Airbnb wherever I was, or do some journaling, or do some reflecting, or go to the restaurants I wanted to go to, whatever. And I remember my therapist at the time was like, I love this for you, because if you don't focus on you, nobody else is. Like, nobody else is waiting for you to focus on yourself, or telling you to focus on yourself. So choosing me was probably the most paradigm shifting thing. But I would say like my 3 best quality of life choices over the years would be, one would be studying philosophy. So studying philosophy was a very good quality of life, because it gave me some very important critical thinking skills and analytical skills, and access to like sacred texts that are not necessarily religious texts, that have helped give me some guidance and direction in terms of like making choices about like living a choiceful life. So majoring in philosophy, studying philosophy was a major quality of life decision. Getting a divorce was a major quality of life decision. Like, my quality of life post-marriage is infinitely better than my quality of life in the context of a marriage. And number 3 would be quitting my job, because even in like the 36 days since I've officially quit my job, my quality of life again already has expanded exponentially. And it's just so like the peace of mind I have, the joy, the lightness that I have. Like, I literally felt like I was drowning. I was so overwhelmed, and like letting go of the weight of doing something that was no longer aligned for me was helpful, without getting caught up in like, and part of it is having a clear sense of your identity, right? Like, so when your identity is wife, mother, professor, it will keep you in bondage to institutions. But when I realized like, oh, I'm still like, my identity really is a philosopher. I really am truly a lover of wisdom, but that doesn't have to equal professor. And I still do have things to offer outside of motherhood. And I'm no longer interested in the title or the status or the work that comes along with being like, I am not wife material. Like, I have no desire to ever get remarried, like been there and done that. So yeah, choosing me was like the major paradigm shift, but quality of life, studying philosophy, quit my marriage, quit my job, top 3 choices I've made.
Okay. As our resident philosopher, what is one book you would recommend for? This is going to be really hard to do, I think.
I know, so hard, but I'll make it work. Yeah.
For every Black woman watching right now, what's one book you'd recommend?
So if I had to choose one, because y'all know I'm all in on Audre Lorde right now, I would say Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider, because it's a collection of essays. But anything written by Audre Lorde would be great. Another of course I can name a bunch of people, because she just writes novels that really get at what's happening. Like, she was able to anticipate what's happening in the world now, like 20, 30 years ago. So I would definitely recommend Octavia Butler too. But now, since I'm working on 2 books on Audre Lorde, I'll go with anything Audre Lorde's written, but Sister Outsider is great because it has a number of different essays that touch on a lot of different topics.
All right, I'm going to, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Boom, give me a second. I'm gonna drop this link here.
I haven't been looking at the comments, but can you send me the comments after so I can go back through them?
You can, yes. I can't really send them to you, but you can see them in the chat if you rewatch this.
Okay, I'll scroll back to, okay. I'm like, oh, I'm missing all the comments. But yes, to pivoting and changing directions, that's one that I saw. Singing my life with her words. Yes.
No, yes, because your story is uniquely yours, but you've got a little piece of everybody in there,
I
right?
think that's, yes. And I think that's why it's so important. I mean, I think a lot of times, like when you're going through something in isolation, you feel alienated. You feel like you're the only person who's experiencing that. But I have never shared my story with other people, particularly Black women, and not had people like shake their head and it resonates, because there's some version of that. Like even the happily unmarried, I initially created that for people who were divorced, but I ended up attracting women who'd never been married, who did not want to get married, who wanted a space to be affirmed in that decision not to get married. And so happily unmarried ended up expanding beyond like the delightfully divorced to like people who are like, I'm happily unmarried and I don't want to get married. And I'm like, but there's so much external pressure to do this thing. So yeah, I've never shared my story and regretted sharing it, like, because people are all like, people feel seen. And then when you share your story, it gives permission for other people to share their story and be comfortable and confident about what their experience is. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Good. So
Yeah.
Southern Rose TD says Sister Outsider is one of her favorites. Yvonne
Yes.
Yvonne McBride also recommended Wild Seed by Octavia Butler and When and Where
Yeah,
I
anything
Enter
by, yeah.
by
When
Paula
it
Giddings.
about like Black women in literature, and she includes a
Mhm.
lot of like stuff from other Black women writers in there as well. So yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of good stuff. Like, you know, there's a lot of amazing like historical books by Black women, and then there's just a lot of stuff coming out now too. So it's an exciting time to be an avid reader.
Let's talk about
Oh, and
your
in
book.
my book,
Let's talk about
yeah.
you.
So
Almost
my
forgot.
first book, I know. So I am an author. So my first book was published in 2014. It's called Hannah Arendt and the Negro Question. So Hannah Arendt is a German Jewish philosopher who fled Germany in the context of the Holocaust, came to the United States, was a scholar here. And so she's a philosopher, political theorist, who a lot of people go to because they're like, oh, she's all about pluralism and all of these things. But she still has like the weight of the Western philosophical canon behind her. So there's still some problematic, like racist things happening in her text. So I basically go through, like, people will say she wrote this essay called Reflections on Little Rock, where she criticized Black parents for letting their kids integrate schools in the United States. And so people who love Arendt will say like, oh, well, she made, if you look at like Origins of Totalitarianism or The Human Condition or her other works, like those are solid. And so my book looks at how the arguments that she makes in Reflections on Little Rock are consistent across her other writings. So it's basically a critique of like how Hannah Arendt deals with anti-Black racism. And that book was published in 2014, but it just got translated into French, which I'm excited about because it means that I have access to a larger Black French-speaking audience, like on the continent of Africa and in other Black French-speaking places because of colonialism, right? So that book got translated into French. And then I have a co-edited book called Convergences, Black Feminism and Continental Philosophy, that came out in 2010, I think, with SUNY Press. And then my newest book is called Beauvoir and Bell, a Black feminist critique of the second sex, where I look at Black women, feminists, and other women of color feminists' engagements with Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. And so that's coming out with Oxford University Press sometime this fall.
I'm going to drop a link to that real quick.
Yeah. Books that are out, and then the two new books with Audre Lorde. One is going to be a philosophical biography, so it's going to be a short biography, but like through a philosophical lens. And then the other one is like a philosophical engagement with her core philosophical concepts in her writings, from her essays and prose to her poetry. So that's what I'll be working on in Germany.
Backing up a second.
Mm-hmm.
If we talk about your life as a professor,
mm-hmm.
what were the high points? So I saw someone here who is mid PhD and is like, girl, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So like,
yeah.
When people ask me that about law school, I'm always like, you don't have to do it. You
don't do it.
It's not necessarily a don't do it, but like, don't think that this
you
is
don't
going
have to do
like,
it.
You have to do it. It's not this like life-changing thing. But what were the high points of being a professor for you?
Yeah. So for me, I loved undergrad. I loved grad school. I had a great time. Like, I was just like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to read and write, right? Like, because I love to read and write. So I actually did not have, a lot of Black really negative experiences in grad school. Like, they get raked over the coals, they go through the fire. But I was very supported in grad school. So I had a good graduate school experience. I enjoyed doing my master's and PhD program. And I've always worked at resource-rich institutions, right? And so I'm never I always had a competitive salary. I always had a research budget, and the research budget you could use to buy computer equipment, to buy books, to travel to conferences. So I can literally be like, I want to write a book on Audre Lorde. I want to go to Germany. And there was money available for me to do that, right? So the problem with that is if you start relying, like if you think that's the only way you can do it, then you can stay stuck there. But like now I'm like, okay, I want to write a book on Audre Lorde. I want to go to Germany. I recognize I can do that outside of the academy. But the highlights, if you're at a resource-rich institution where you have a competitive salary, where you have a research budget, where you have a limited course load. So I've only ever taught a 2-2 course load, but there are some universities where you have to teach 4 classes a semester. I know people who've taught as many as 8 classes a semester, which is like not doable for me. So I've always been in a kind of best case scenario and supported. So my research was always really well supported. Whatever I wanted to write about, I could write about. Wherever I wanted to travel for my research, I could travel. And like if I taught a really big class that had like 90 students, I was in a PhD, I was in a department that had a PhD program. So I had graduate students who were teaching assistants that did the grading, for example, right? So there are perks. If you like to read and write and publish, then it's great because you can do that to, get promoted and get tenure. If you like to go to conferences and you want access to research funds to go to conferences and things like that, then it can be good for that. And it is a great intellectual community. There's always a bunch of speakers on campus across a lot of different departments and things like that. So if you really love those kinds of things, that's great. But those things do also come with, again, the department meetings, the emails, the committee meetings, and other kinds of things that start to become a distraction from the thing that you really like to do. So I always say, like, I loved it until I didn't, right? Like, I think it was really like, it was real. And that's when I knew it was time to go, right? Like, because when I was loving it, it was like, okay, yeah, I can do more of this. But when it got to a place where I wasn't loving it anymore, I knew I needed to transition out. But there are definitely highlights to doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. If you go to the right place.
If you go to the right place, right? What, I'm getting deep in your business right now.
No, what was okay. I'm an open book.
What was the highlight of being married?
Ooh. When it was good, well, I'm glad, like, I love my children. I'm glad that I brought them into the world, right? Because they are beautiful souls. I think when it was good, like date nights and banter and things like that are good when they're good. But you reach a point where you're just like, this is sucking the life out of me. Like, you're doing all the things. Like, I think women have been hoodwinked to, like, how is it that you are like the primary breadwinner and the primary caretaker, and like you're literally doing everything, right? Like, so I think it's one thing, and there are, power differentials and structural issues with like a woman not having to work, and like the expectation is she takes care of stuff at home because he's taking care of the financial stuff, right? Like, that's one model, which we can talk about the critiques of it. But how is it that you became the person that both has to be the primary provider in the house, and you're also the primary caregiver for the kids, and you're the person who's making sure that, stuff is getting cleaned or meals are getting prepared and all of that kind of stuff. So at a certain point, it was like, how did I get so many jobs? Like, this is exhausting, and it's not feeding. Like, again, it's more depleting and draining than it is uplifting. And I find that that's most Black, and let's talk about like the gold digger stereotype. Like, I don't know a single Black woman that has financially benefited from a man in their life. Like, literally not a single one. Now, I know male gold diggers who have benefited from their Black woman partners, like, and, gotten all like, I married somebody who had a bachelor's degree. By the time we were divorced, he had 2 masters and a PhD that he was able to get because of my situation, right? So yeah, let's put it into the gold digger stereotype, because like, we're holding it down.
I'm sitting here trying to think of a Black woman I know that has benefited financially from a relationship.
And like, I literally, like, I know a lot of Black women who've been economically and emotionally exploited by those marriages and those partnerships, but I don't know anybody for whom the opposite is the case.
I'm like, the wheels are turning, and I'm like, I have to know one sister who's out there getting by, and I can't It's not.
I can't think of a single one, not in my circle. But I think the other thing is the trap of being a high achiever is like we will present a public front as if everything is good. It all, like, from the outside looking in, it looks so whatever. And then behind closed doors, it's all kinds of frustrations, animosities. So I know I quickly shifted. You asked about the benefits of marriage, and I quickly shifted to the benefits of
no
not
benefits.
being married.
Right. And
No,
you're right.
and
Like
I think,
you had the kids. I think a lot of, because we are trained as women that like marriage is the goal. Marriage is the goal.
that's
or
exactly
like
where I was about to go.
marriage creates a stability that you can't get otherwise, or gives you things you can't get otherwise. I think a lot of us don't put much thought into what we are getting and what we are giving in these relationships, as long as the end goal, or the end is marriage. As long as like I like getting to, we're taught that getting to marriage is winning, right? Like that is, you have won something.
It's a booby prize.
But getting women out of that, or realizing, so like, I talk trash about men here all the time, but I do think it's somewhat joking and then somewhat not, because a lot of women I know are in marriages that don't serve them, but they don't see the way out, or they don't see that like giving that sacred no, right, to the marriage that you're in can lead to sacred yeses of more pleasure in the future and more joy.
Yeah, and I think there are parallels between this in marriages and in jobs, because there's an assumption, there's the illusion of security, there's the illusion of safety, there's illusion of like, this is what from the outside looking in, everybody thinks that I should have. But it's just like, if you're miserable, then what have you gained from that, right? And so it's like really, and I think, so with I think again, with both, there's a scarcity mentality of like, there are no other men out there, or there are no other job opportunities or ways for you to generate income for yourself. And both of those are lies, right? Like, so in my experience, like I thought like, oh my goodness, I was in my late 30s when I got divorced. And this is the thing, this is again, the trust and the intuition. Like, I feel like my 40-year-old self came to me at 35 and was like, girl, what's not going to make it. Like 40 is about to be amazing, but what can't make it to 40? That marriage, like that marriage is not making it. So like it's like my future self came back to me in my mid 30s so that I could begin the process of like extracting myself in a marriage. And then the same thing with the job. Like, I feel like my 50-year-old self is like, girl, 50 is about to be amazing, but what can't make it to 50? That job. So how are you about to get out of that job? Right. And so, but there's a scarcity mentality. Like, so I was like, okay, I'm getting divorced. I have 4 kids. Like, who's going to be interested in taking on? But let me tell you something. There are plenty of great men out here who are happy to be as engaged or not engaged as you want them to be. So I have had a lot of fun in my happily unmarried, erotically empowered post-divorce life, and met a lot of great guys, several of whom would have been happy to marry me if I was a marrying type, which I am not. So I extracted myself from that institution once. I'm not going to do it again. But so I've met plenty of great guys post-divorce. And again, plenty of opportunities have presented themselves to me post that job, from the fellowship to even to presses. Like, I've had trade presses reach out to me like, we know about your work. We're a fan of your work. Let us know if you're working on anything that you would like to publish with us. And so it can be really hard to get a lot of times people have to get like an agent, other kinds of things. A lot of times people need like an agent in order to get an audience with a trade press. And I've had trade presses like reach out directly to me about opportunities. So it's like, again, the more clarity you have about what you want and what you want to do, I feel like the universe and opportunities align with that. But it's like when you're being pulled in a bunch of different directions and you're confused, it's like, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Okay. You mentioned few minutes ago about your future self coming back to you, and then right now we talked about clarity. Do you know how you were able to hear those voices, right? How were you able to get the clarity? Like, was there a certain moment where like the portal opened for you? Like, how did you get that intuitive message?
So for me, sometimes it comes in the form of like, it can be like reading. Like, so for example, I was reading this book. It was something that Oprah represented or recommended. It was called The Seat of the Soul by Zukov.
Mhm.
And so I was like running, I was training for like a half marathon, and I'm listening to this audiobook, and he has a chapter about so Zukov has a chapter on like split intentions or divided intentions or something like that. And so he gives the example. So he's like, so if you're married and your intentions are split toward the marriage, like the marriage is going to end because your intention is not like to be in a marriage. And I was like training for a race, I'm running, and I was literally stopped in my tracks because I was like, this is me. Like my intention is very split on this situation, but I didn't know how to extract, like, I didn't know how to give myself permission to get out of something just because I was unhappy and I didn't want to be in it anymore. Right. So it was one of those things where it was like, okay, well, he's not abusive. He's not this, he's not that. And so I had to get to a place of like, okay, me not wanting to be married anymore is reason enough to not be married anymore, and kind of start the process of extracting myself from that. So for me, it's like, you know, sometimes it's through like books and or like what I call bibliotherapy. Sometimes it is in like my own kind of meditation or prayer time. And sometimes it's like if you don't listen to, or for me, if I don't listen to like that kind of more still small voice, then things will get bigger and more amplified. So it comes in a form of like not being able to sleep at night. It comes in a form of like migraines. Like when I'm misaligned and I don't make adjustments, everything in my body and my spirit and my emotions is like, danger, girl, like get this together, pay attention. Like it's emotional, like feeling peace of mind with that intuition. So there's like an emotional element to it. It's physiological, like how I feel in my body. And I think a lot of times we're so disconnected from our bodies that we can't pay attention to the message. But it's like, you know, when, you know, there's like, well, for me, like tension shows up in my neck and my shoulders or my lower back, right? Or when something just feels off, like I know how that feels in my body. So I know what a sacred no feels like in my body, but I also know what a sacred yes feels like in my body. But that's part of like just paying attention to my emotions and my feelings and not suppressing them, but also paying attention to my body and what it's teaching me.
Okay. So I bet there's a bunch of us who are not paying attention to our body right now.
Yeah, it's a
and
thing.
Probably don't have the clarity to link, you know,
Right.
this thing going on with this physical thing going on with this
Right.
mental
Right.
conflict or something else going on with our lives.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I do think it takes a little bit of
it takes some
of
practice.
listening.
Absolutely.
Yes, practice of
Absolutely.
listening
And for
in.
me, that also came through yoga. So I started practicing yoga. And then again, because I'm a high achiever, what did I do? I became a certified yoga teacher, right? Like, so I got a 200-hour certification. I got a 500-hour certification, right? Because it's like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to know how to do all the things, right?
Yes.
But much deeper way than before I was doing yoga. And you would think after having 4 kids that I would be connected to my body in a certain kind of way, but like motherhood and giving birth did not connect me to my body in the same way that like being attuned to it through a yoga practice did. And for me, that started with like hot yoga, because you can't like, well, for me, in the intensity of the heat of that room and the sweating and doing like a regular sequence, like it got me out of my head. I can't think about, because I'm like, it's like, you know, your brain can't do or for me, my brain couldn't do 100 things an hour when I was doing that. So it was a way of like kind of really forcing me to concentrate on my body and connect in my body. And then after I got through the hot yoga and got the certifications and other forms of yoga, it was, you know, I learned to like, I didn't need the intensity of the heat to connect to my body in that way. Yeah. Okay. But it's like, you have to pay attention to those messages, but it takes practice.
I went through that same sequence. I was in my 300, I was in my 500-hour program, the second 3, when I realized I didn't want to be at work anymore. I needed to do something else. I was in the middle of that program, finished the first 100 hours, and then left, and I've never been back to do the last 200 hours. But and I did the same thing you did. I started with like a very physical. I did the Bikram. I did, you know, the hot room vinyasas. I did all of those things, and then I gradually moved on to other forms that I really love. Because I don't need to beat my body up, but I'm even starting with the hot yoga, starting with like vinyasa, a really physical vinyasa practice, and Bikram, I wasn't listening to my body, right? I was
because you're just going through the motions.
You're just trying to survive.
Scratching and surviving.
It's 1,000 degrees in here. I can't even drink water. What is y'all talking about? What is happening? Right? Like I was just trying to survive. But doing that enough and then backing down, I was then able to say like, oh, okay, this doesn't feel good in my body, right? Like listening to things that feels good, as opposed to just like, I don't want to pass that on this mat, Like, how
Mhm.
can I not pass it on this mat?
Right.
Yeah, the practice of listening to yourself, of I want to talk a little bit about intrusive thoughts, but not in like the negative way that people normally talk
Yeah.
about intrusive thoughts, but those thoughts that keep coming back to you. If every day you wake up and you tell yourself you don't want to go to work, you're gonna have to
That
stop going to
part.
work, girl. You're gonna have to like,
Right.
I don't know what to tell you, because that's not, a new boss wasn't
Right.
going to help it. It wasn't going to change things for
Right.
me.
Right.
More money
Yes.
wasn't going to change things for me. A higher
Right.
position wasn't going to change things for me. I don't
Right.
like these people. I don't want to do this work,
Right.
but I don't.
Right. No, I think that's so true. So two things that you just said. One is like paying attention to your body. It like I don't think you have to become a certified yoga teacher to do this. It can start with little things like when you have to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom.
When you're
Like how many
hungry,
times do you
eat.
when you're hungry, eat. When you're thirsty, drink some water, right? Like literally, if you like eat, drink, and use the bathroom when your body needs those things, like that's one way of like a small way of connecting to your body and doing that consistently. But I think we tend to like, it's like you're at your computer, you have to go to the bathroom, you hold it for 30 minutes or an hour, however long till you finish the task, instead of just getting up and going to the bathroom and like attending to your body. So like going to the bathroom, eating when you're hungry, drinking water when you're thirsty, or not eating when you're not hungry, or not like just continuing to do something because it's in front of you. So that's one way. But then concerning the intrusive thoughts, you're not thinking about it as only those negative feedback loops, but the thing when you're like, you don't want to do this anymore. Like I posted last week a thing on Monday that it was like, you don't hate Mondays, you hate your job, right? Like, like Monday didn't do anything to you, but Monday is the day that people tend to have to go back to work. So when I was in my job, like I knew it was time to go when every week I kept saying like, okay, if I can just make it till Friday, if I can just make it till Friday. And I was just like, I don't want to live a life where I'm constantly trying to fast forward through Monday through Thursday to get to Friday and to get to the weekend. Like I want every day to feel like the weekend. Like how can I create a life for myself? How can I design a life for myself where the juiciness and the loveliness and the joy and the pleasure of the weekend can be a part of my everyday life? And when I quit my job, I got that.
Right. It's weird.
Yeah.
Like I look forward to Fridays, but not because it's the end of the week. It's Fridays every day I get to meet with Stephanie, if I remember.
Yay!
That I have a meeting with Stephanie. So like every Friday morning, it's like boom. And then my housekeeper comes.
Yes.
And I leave the house and I come back and it's stunning.
And it's clean.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's clean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like, so like I have made Friday for me like a joyful day. And I don't know that I would even had the thought to do that
right
when I was working. Because for me, Friday was like, if I could, because even like Friday morning, which is like, I could just make it through the day. Like Friday wasn't joyful. It was just a block to get past. Like, yes, I'm glad we're here, but I got to make it through the day. And now I'm like, yay, I wake up, talk about some Exodus Summit stuff. Clean lady comes in, I go do something, go to yoga or Pilates or something. I come back, my place is stunning. And I'm like, let me get a little bit of stuff done and then I have nothing to do, right? And I feel good about that. And I think that what I've gotten from that is, what I've picked up from my Fridays is that in some way that's accessible to all of us, right? In some way, there's a way to make, and maybe it's not Friday for you, maybe it's a different day, but to make that day really joyful, where like every moment of that day is a day where you're like, I'm really glad I did this today. Yeah. But there's so many things that are in our way and we are allowing to be in our way.
Right.
That we don't often do that. It doesn't seem accessible. We talked about women in marriage and in these jobs, and so much of the messages we get are like, just suck it up, and like suck it up with a smile, right? Grin and bear it,
like, and act like you're enjoying it. Yeah,
act like you're enjoying it,
even if you're not. Yeah, which perpetuates the problematic. Like it positively reinforces people. Like I call it a trap. I'm like, it's a trap. Like this is a trap. Like do not caught up in a trap. Don't get caught up in the trap. And then even on that note, like when I posted the you don't hate Mondays, you hate your job, there was a woman who was a mother who was like, well, one of the things I loved about Mondays is what? Her kids went to school. Like, you know what I mean? Because, and I'm like, yeah, that's because your other job was the one that you work after work and on the weekend, for which you're not getting compensated. And Monday becomes an opportunity to get a break from that job to go to the other job.
Not that you hate your kids, but you hate both your jobs. And that's why.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I love my kids, but listen, the day to day It's a lot. It's a lot. The
Yes.
day to day is a lot. Yeah. So, so
Mm-mm.
yeah, I think, well, and I like what you're saying, like you know, even if you're not quitting your job immediately, like what does it look like to invite more joy, invite more pleasure into your
Mhm.
life, right? Like, so if you can take, even if it's like a couple of hours, if not a full day, you know, what would you do with that time to invite joy and pleasure into your life?
Mhm.
And experiment with that and see what feels good. But some of us have been so disconnected from joy and pleasure for so
We
long.
don't know
It's
what
like
feels good.
finding your way back into like, well, what does feel good for me? Because you're so used to just going along, and it's like, I don't like this. I don't really want to go there. I really don't really want to do this, but I'm just going to go along for whatever, for everybody else to be satisfied. And me, you know, we constantly sacrifice our own joy and pleasure to meet the
Mhm.
needs of other people. And at a certain point, it's like you have to, like, again, you have to choose to focus on you and not
Right.
see that as selfish, but see it as self actualizing, right? Like when
Mhm.
you focus on you, then you're able to, from a stronger position, decide if or when or what you want to do for other people.
I would like us in this moment, and I want this is audience participation time, so I'll be watching the comments. I would like us to talk about ways that we can bring more joy into our lives, right?
Yes.
And so if you're watching right now, you're in the audience, write down one way, one because someone else, another one
Hmm.
watching this might get an idea from you. So what is one
Yes.
way that you can bring more joy into your life? You can bring more joy into your life. I think
Hmm.
for me, my default is like just Netflix. Like if I'm like I have nothing to do, and while it does bring me joy, a lot of times I'm like there is nothing on this, right? Like
Right.
I got HBO Max. I don't have Max. Mexico, we don't have Max yet. We're still HBO Max. We're behind the times. I'm using my mama's Amazon Prime, and I'm still like there is nothing like, and that should be a sign to me that this isn't really what I want to do right now, right? If I got all of these programs and I can't find a single thing I want to watch, I probably don't want to watch TV. But I'm so
Hmm.
used to like sitting down on the couch and then like
Yeah.
slipping down to that lay down position with the remote in my hand and like
Hmm.
finding it. And so
Yes.
I know that for me, that should be a signal that I'm like, there's go do something else, right? Instead, and
Yeah.
come back. Because sometimes where I'm like, oh, this is so bright. Like I can get into it. I can get engaged with the TV and it's not
Hmm.
just watching me. And
Hmm.
so I'd like to find something. For me, that feels a bit like I'm actively tuning out of something I should be tuning into. And so
Hmm.
I am looking for something to replace with that. Southern Rose
Hmm.
TD said naps. I'm all about naps.
Yeah.
Dara
Naps.
said something creative. For
Creative.
her, it's painting. My travel goddess is floating in the water. Orletta embraces silence and not always having something to do.
Hmm.
Silence is something I struggle with. I was
Mm.
going to a meditation
Thing.
thing once. It was a recurring meditation thing. Um,
Hmm.
and they talked about like the benefit of being in silent and like choosing moments where you're silent. And when I was there and present, like when I was driving in the car, I didn't drive with music or anything on. It was just
Hmm.
me and the steering wheel and my silence and my thoughts. And I realized I don't have a lot of silence in my life. And I'm not the only
Hmm.
one that doesn't have a lot of
Hmm.
silence in their life where it's just
Hmm.
them and their thoughts. And so I think I'm going to try
Practice more silence. Yeah.
practice more silence in place of like the streaming services.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really value silence and solitude. And I think that's in part because I'm a mother of four, right? So
Yeah.
like people are always like, aren't you like lonely? And I'm like, I value solitude and my alone time, like,
Mhm.
because that's where I can like refresh, replenish, rest, be a lady of leisure. So I really value silence and solitude. I've definitely done some silent retreats before and do like meditative practices that involve silence. So I love that. I do love being in nature. I love coffee shops. I think there's, because went to coffee shops a lot in graduate school where I used to study and write a lot. There's like an association between the joy, because I also enjoy reading and writing, right? So coffee shops are part of that pleasure for me. Like I like the smell of it. the latte maker and all that kind of stuff, and the clattering in the background. I like being around the people that I love, that, love me back. I like the mountains and the water, like the rivers and the oceans and things like that. I do like, just getting outside for a walk, getting like the sun on my skin. I love being in a climate now. I mean, it's definitely hot and humid in Savannah, but I'll take hot and humid over like the frigid cold of like the winters in Pennsylvania where I left. I like kink and BDSM events. Those are a great source of joy and pleasure for me. Again, because of the emphasis on, like, I know I'm not going to be violated. I know that people like respect my bodily autonomy. I know that people are going to check in before engaging me. And so those spaces are like great joy and pleasure spaces for me as well. So it is good to like take some time to maybe make a list. Like, when is the last time you felt joy or pleasure? Like, how long has it been? For some people, it may be going back to your childhood. And sometimes it is like, well, what were things that brought you joy and pleasure as a child? And how can you practice bringing some of those things back into your life? Yeah. Dancing for sure. I love live music and concerts. Yeah.
Lots of people, we have water from a lot of people. Stephanie said she's going to integrate that by staying in hotels more frequently when she's in a place where she doesn't have a pool, so she can get to the pool.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I saw sewing, gardening. Deborah goes for walks every day. I go for walks every day, but I always have headphones in.
With headphones,
always. And so I'm not getting that like.
You're not getting the silence
myself.
of
I'm
it.
listening to a podcast, right? I'm right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try some of this.
I think it is good to walk with, for me, and it's been a while since I've trained for a race, but when I was training for like 5Ks and 10Ks and stuff like that, I usually ran without, like, some people run with music because it helps motivate them and keep a pace and things like that. But for me, again, it was harder for me to stay connected to like my body and my breath if I was listening to something. So I tended to run silent. If I wasn't listening to like an audio book, then I would tend to run in silence too for that. So it was another way of like staying connected to my body when I was in motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Float therapy, spa and sauna. Yeah, I do love a good spa day for sure.
Yes. I want to
eating good food. Oh, I don't know how I forgot that one. That's probably actually number one on my list. Like really yummy food prepared by other people, because I don't like to cook. Yeah, but somebody else prepared food is a source of joy and pleasure for me.
I actually like cooking, but like, who gonna clean this up?
Right.
Because after I eat, I just want to go to. I either want to be on the couch, chill in further. I do the thing. I do the thing. So for me, what that means is that like if I cook a large meal during the week, it's on Thursday because my clean lady.
Because somebody's coming Friday. Perfect.
Every Friday, I'm like, I'm so sorry, girl.
Yeah.
But you know what it looks like over here when you show up.
You already know. But and I also, can we talk about the importance of giving ourselves permission to get those kinds of services? Like, so having, like, I had somebody who helped me clean the house, especially when I had all the kids in the house. I haven't found anybody in Savannah for that yet, but I have found in Savannah a laundry service. So like they will come every week and pick up my laundry and bring it back washed and folded. And so, things that will taking advantage of what services can you hire out to give yourself more space and time and improve your quality of life.
And there's so many that we either don't think of or we think are out of our reach.
Yeah. Right? But check the rates.
Yeah. When I lived in Ohio, I think I hired a cleaning lady once every 3 weeks. So it wasn't as often as I needed her. And it was like, I think it was $80. This was years ago, but I think it was $80 every 3 weeks. She'd be there all day. Some man was like, well, if you did it only once a month. And I was like, you don't even live here, dog. Like,
right. And you're not paying for it. So
and you're not cleaning. So
and you're not cleaning, right? You're not doing, you have no say in this for all of these reasons.
Are you putting in on the more? No, you're not.
Right.
Like, it's the idea that like, even though this was a very helpful service and one I should have probably gotten more frequently, and knowing what I know now, I would have done it more frequently in order to, even if it meant I had to skip something like
happy
hour,
something that was not right, something that was not giving you as much value.
Yes. Now that I have it every week, I'm like, oh no, this is life-changing.
Yeah. I definitely had it every week in Pennsylvania. Like somebody would come 3 hours and she was wonderful. Like she saw the kids grow up, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But it was like me and 4 kids, like that was gonna be we needed
Work.
some
Yes.
assistance up in
Yes.
this piece.
It's gonna be some
So I
work.
had a lot of gratitude for that every week. So
Mhm.
yeah, to see
Yeah.
what are services that, or you know, again, going back to that, taking inventory, like what are the things that you dread doing that
Mhm.
you absolutely would be happy to pay somebody else to do for you, or
Mhm.
and give yourself permission to do that without worrying about what other people say or think
Yes.
about it.
Because someone's always
Because
going
again,
to
they're
think
not,
something about it,
somebody
but they're
always has
not.
something to say, but they're not cleaning for you, or they're not providing a meal for you or whatever. So yeah.
I used before they had like the meal delivery services they have now, there was a
Hmm.
place in Columbus that Black owned.
Hmm.
She stopped doing it after a while, where they would just be like, these are the meals we have this week.
Hmm.
And there'd be these little disposable pans, and you would just come and like it would be like lasagna or so, whatever,
Right.
right? Like, and I would just pop by, pick up like, some meals. I could stick them in the freezer, some in the fridge, eat that. And it was so I was mad
When they stopped.
when they stopped. I
Yeah.
was like, where am I supposed
Yeah.
to get food from? But
Yeah.
also at the same time, I didn't go looking for other places that did that,
Yeah.
which is probably where I
Yeah.
should have done. I think that often happens to a lot of us. Like
Yeah.
the thing that we have in our regular rotation, if it
Hmm.
falls out, we don't go look for
It
the new
takes time to
thing,
find
or it
somebody
takes
else, yeah,
time,
or to find
right? Like,
somebody who does it at the same quality. I had the same
right.
thing. I actually had a person who was doing meals for the family every week. And then I went on my earlier sabbatical, that's like around 2015. And my mistake was I should have kept, I was thinking like, well, I'm on sabbatical now. I don't have as much demands on my time. I can go back to preparing meals. And then by the time I came off, she had like kind of moved on and was doing something else. So I regret not keeping that service, because one of the greatest sources of stress for me as a mother of 4 was like dinner every night. Like, what are
Mhm.
we eating? So having somebody who provides meals is definitely a game changer, especially like
Mhm.
whether you're solo or you have dependents,
Right.
especially if
And
you have dependents.
I frequently see things like, oh, if you can't clean your house yourself, you have too much house. Or what are you really
Maybe
doing
you
if you
just
can't
don't like
do?
cleaning. Listen, my house now is significantly smaller than the one I had in Pennsylvania, but I still don't want to clean it. My 14-year-old just said he'll clean it.
The idea that we're supposed to, as women, supposed to love this domestic labor, or at least
Things, it's like,
do it
no, and some
joyfully.
do, and if you
Yes.
do, I love that for you, but I am
Yes.
not some, I have never loved, I probably used to enjoy cooking more before it was expected and became a
Hmm.
duty for me, and
Hmm.
that completely turned me off for it. So like I have the ability to cook, but I don't actually like, it doesn't spark any kind of joy for me. And cleaning absolutely does not spark any kind of joy
Hmm.
for me. Organizing I like, because I like structure and putting things in a
Hmm.
particular kind of place, but that's different for me than cleaning, scrubbing and dusting and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want more women to wake up to their sacred yeses and their sacred nos. And I say that
Yes,
I'm including
yes.
myself in that sometimes we're
Mhm.
just so detached. We're so we're so programmed, right?
We're
Of
very
we're very
programmed.
And even when we think we are I feel like I'm fighting programming daily, and I'm still programmed, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's
Exactly.
just
And again, it's just like I literally am like, I'm the Black feminist, teach all the Black feminist texts, write all the Black feminist stuff. And I was still stuck in the trap of like doing things that I actually didn't want to do, and very disconnected from my body and disconnected from my joy and disconnected from my pleasure. So it's like there's a lot of unpacking of origin that gets reinforced through, you know, social institutional structures. But it's like checking in with like giving your, and you know what, sometimes we also reinforce that trap with each other, right? Like I was just
Mhm.
at an event where there were a number of women who were mothers who had like kind of gotten away from their kids in order to go to this thing. And so one of them had like maybe a 3-year-old or something. And so the other one was like, oh, I'm sure you really miss your 3-year-old, right? And her face said, hell no. But her mouth was like, oh, yes, I can't wait to get back to him. And I said, you know what? It's okay not to miss your 3-year-old. Like, it's okay to enjoy having a break from the day-to-day responsibility when that all falls on you of caring for a 3-year-old, right? And so you could just feel the relief of like her just getting permission to not have to miss her kid every time that she was not. And, you know, that kid was not in her presence.
I wonder how much of that is external and how much of that is internal. How much of that is feeling, because of how we programmed that, like, when you're not with your children, you're supposed to miss them. So even if someone didn't have that reaction to her, would she feel a way if she missed or didn't miss her child if no one had said anything? Because
go ahead.
No, go.
It's important to ask the question of like, how do I feel versus how I think I'm supposed to feel, right? Because how you feel is how you feel, right? But how you, like, it's like, am I supposed to feel this way, or have I been conditioned to feel this way? Like, that requires like a little bit more thoughtfulness and reflection. And so there have been times when it's just like, okay, you know how you actually feel, and then you suddenly feel guilty for feeling how you actually feel because of all of this messaging that you're getting externally. And so it's like, how do you tap into separating out, like, how do I actually feel versus what have I been told I'm supposed to feel? And you're not a horrible mother if you don't miss your 3-year-old for getting away for 3 days from, you know, your child. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, pretty particular. I think hire someone to pick up her dog poop. I think that's what's going on in that comment. Listen, I was like, how much some services cost? Because I don't want to do this. My dog.
I do not have any pets. And I'm like, I got 4 kids. I couldn't do pets and kids, but I think even if I didn't have kids, I wouldn't have done pets. But I get, like, I definitely support services for whatever support services you need for your pets.
Lady Sarita said perfection can be a killer. Yeah, we are.
Absolutely.
And frequently, perfection is requested from us, from people who are not providing perfection.
The most mediocre people will expect you to be perfect, and then will have the audacity to part their lips to criticize something that you did when they couldn't have done a tenth of the job that you just did. But, you know, I often tell people to practice strategic incompetence, right? Like, we know that you're but this, and you know, you've talked about this, Stephanie has talked about this, like the problem of the Black excellence narrative, the problem of the work twice as hard to get half as far. Like, we put so much stress and pressure on ourselves, or our families and society has put so much stress and pressure on us. But like, I've been really intentional about practicing strategic incompetence, like when I was still working, which I'm not anymore, which I'm loving. But when I was still like going into the meeting and not taking notes, because as soon as you start taking notes, then they're like, oh, would you like to chair this meeting? Oh, can you take the minutes, right? And it's just like, I don't pull out near a pen or paper or anything, because I'm not about to do any of the tasks that y'all about to drum up in this meeting. So practicing more strategic incompetence and not feeling like, but I think, again, for as high achievers and as Black women in particular, it's like we're constantly feeling like we have to prove ourselves and all of the skill set that we have and give all of the things into the spaces that we're in. And it's just like, that is not sustainable. And they will continue to like extract, right? Like, they're never going to say you're doing too much, or maybe for the least. As long as you're willing to do the most for the least, they're willing to take advantage of that. So practicing more strategic incompetence and not feeling like you have to do all the things. And also feeling, you know, I think also for high achievers, feeling like you have to prove that you could survive some crazy situation, right? Like, it's like, I'm not going to let them, you know, run me out of here. And it's just like, well, no, it doesn't have to be them running you out. It can be you choosing to walk away with your peace and your sanity. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that came up in the comments, there was a man talking about how women are demanding sexually because they want you to do this, they want you to do that. And I'm like, it's probably because, this is going to sound personal to him, I don't know this man. It's probably because you're not trying. It's probably because you're not, like, we talked about this, how like women are expected to
do all the things.
To do all the things.
Yeah.
And
domestic workers, sex workers, all the things.
Yes, you're supposed to be the pleasure source for this man. And men are expected to just show up. So this woman is probably being demanding because you are not giving her pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to
Or
kiss
you've
them
never
for
been
so
with
long.
somebody who ever actually asked you or required that of you. But let me tell y'all something too. There's also this myth. There are a lot of very pleasure-centered givers out there. And so again, once I got happily unmarried, I was able to attract people who were like, what do you want? How do you want it? Well, how can I show up for you? And so, but figure out from like I had to learn what I wanted so that I could then ask what I wanted, as well as be open to having new experiences. But I've had like basically everybody that I've been with post divorce has been a very giver, pleasure center. Like, what can I do to pleasure you?
And how did you
I'll be
call
your
that
genie
into
in the
your
bottle.
life?
I think it was an
Take notes.
energetic thing where it was just like, okay, what, like, again, figuring out what I want that I'm worthy of. And it's like, okay, if I'm going to show up for this experience, like, it's not like, what's the point if it's not pleasure filled? Like, what's the point of having a sensual or sexual encounter that is not actually pleasurable? But I can usually tell energetically from somebody before I've gotten to that point if they are that way. And I mean, you know, this is probably something that I should incorporate into the erotic empowerment of like, it's not always a telltale sign of like if they say or do this, because a lot of people will talk a good game, but they don't necessarily back it up. But I was like, if I was to say one thing, well, for me, consent is important. So somebody who feels like they have access to my body without asking me, it's a no-go, because it's like if you touch my arm or you try to kiss me or something and I say like, okay, well, you need to check in about that first, and you get offended by that, then it's going to be a problem later, right? Better with that. And then people who will offer, like a lot of times people will be like, these are the things that I would like to do for you or do with you. Like, are you down? And so I do think it's energetic, but I think there probably are, we have to think more about like, what are some general qualities or characteristics of that person? Because some people will say that they are a pleaser, but actually are not. But I think once I decided I was worthy of pleasure, and if I was going to engage sexually, then it needed to be a pleasure-centered experience. Like that really shifted, who I attracted into my life. And also did healing and releasing of like literally being in a 17-year relationship where like I got no pleasure and satisfaction. And this was like, how is it that like I went that long and didn't think that it was, I was just like, and internalize it like, oh, well, it must be me. I must just not like it. Like, it never occurred to me that maybe I didn't have the right partner.
What I think is so interesting is that 17 years while you were in that relationship and you weren't experiencing pleasure with one person, there were other women who were experiencing multiple men and also not getting pleasure. Right? Like,
oh, that part, right? Like across the board. Yeah.
Across
So it's
the
like,
board.
yeah. But I think once you decide, like, I'm just before with the domestic work, like you're expected to pretend that you enjoy domestic work. You're expected to pretend that you're having an orgasmic experience with somebody that you're not actually having an orgasmic experience with. And so it's like, stop faking it. Like if it's not working, then you need to be able to have a conversation with that and communicate that. And I get that there can be actually really problematic, dire consequences to that when there are certain kind of people with certain kind of egos who can turn really nasty and vicious and violent around those kinds of things. But hopefully by the time you've gotten to that place, you can feel out if that is going to be like an actual dangerous situation from you, which you would want to extract yourself from anyway. But I think a large part of it is just giving yourself permission to have a pleasure-centered life, like, again, not only sensually and sexually, but in other areas of your life. And then figuring out through self-exploration, through coaching, like, and this is part of what I do with the erotic empowerment coaching, is like, how do you learn your body and what you enjoy? And it doesn't mean, I mean, sometimes it is, one of the things that I have as part of that program is actually like a menu of services, of like sexual services, like the appetizers, the small plates, the entrees, the desserts, right? And like, you can kind of go through and decide, like, is this something that you've tried and you like, that you would like to try with a partner, or something you're curious about that you would like to explore with the partner? So part of it is giving yourself permission to do some exploration, because you don't know what you don't know if you haven't tried it or experienced it with somebody who's good at it. And, right? So one of the benefits of like, so I practice ethical non-monogamy. So I'm team multiple part. Like I feel like about dating the way I feel about mentors. Like you shouldn't just have one mentor. It's like, what are your mentoring needs and how do you identify different people that can meet those needs? And the same thing with relationships. Like, what are my romantic relationship needs and how do I find different people that can meet those needs? And I always play to people's strengths. Like some people are really good at some things and not great at others. But when you have multiple partners, it's like, okay, well, this is the person that I go through to for this thing because he loves to do that thing and he's really good at it. And this is the person that I go to for this other thing because he loves to do that other thing and he's really good at it. And nobody feels put out by doing that thing because it's what they like to do and what they do well. Right? Instead of trying to drag somebody to do something that they don't want to do because it's not going to be enjoyable for either one of y'all.
I feel like you're giving us some cheat codes today. Like you said, sex down south in Atlanta.
Sex down south.
Sex down
and
south.
There's all kinds of workshops about ethical non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, all the things, all the buzzwords that you're hearing. And what I love about, again, is it's sex educators, because you have a lot of people who get on who talk a good game about this stuff, but they don't really know what they're talking about. So being in a space where, there are people who are actually trained this stuff, getting in a space where people are actually trained at this and like it really is their profession to teach and do these things. It's a game changer. It's a game changer.
Okay.
And there's such a full range of things. So like, even if you're like more, quote unquote vanilla, like you like to keep things, whatever, you're not trying to go to like the far extreme. Sometimes seeing a wide variety of things helps you expand from the small, narrow thing that you've been doing. So it's like, you don't have to go from A to Z, but experiment with B and C and D and see how that feels for you. Right. And then, so, you don't have to do all the things, but it at least shows you a variety of options that are available that you can choose to opt into or opt out of.
Okay. What advice would you give a first timer attending that conference? Because I think we might have some first timers in the audience.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll be there. So if you want to holler at me while you're there, I'll see you there. I would say maybe go with a buddy that you trust so that you don't feel like you're the only person in each space. So like somebody you can like go with and y'all can decide what you want to attend together or what separate session you might want to go to. But then you can kind of talk about like, oh, girl, this is what happened. And oh, I learned that. And I'm going to try this. So I would say if you can go with a buddy, or apparently a bunch of us are going to be there. So like y'all can figure out in a and do a whole, meet up at Sex Down South. Again, I'll be there. But I would say go being open-minded, go with a buddy if you can. But even if you're going solo, and you don't have to do anything. So it's not like you're going and you're expected to like volunteer to be a demo for somebody in the audience. Like you really can be a voyeur. You really can just go and look and listen and learn. So be open-minded and just like go to the sessions that pique your interest and see what you learn and see what you're willing to try. And it's also helpful to see like what makes you super uncomfortable, right? And why does it make you uncomfortable? Is it because you really don't want to do that thing or because you really do want to do it, but you've been told good girls don't do that or whatever, so it's like good to pay attention to what comes up for you in the space because people are like so free. Right. And so there's something about seeing other people be really free that can make you feel empowered to be free. But sometimes if you're not so free, it can make you feel some kind of way about like, why are they so free like that? And then you gotta kind of get past that to get to your own freedom and liberation. But yeah, be open-minded and know that there's no pressure to do anything. So it's not like a big old orgy or anything like that. It really is like people who are professional sex educators, sharing different things. I mean, there's definitely some, and they have like evening that like they separate out like the educational things during the daytime from like what they call like the big bang and the little bang at night, which are a bit more edgy. But even with that stuff, like, again, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And there's also, well, I was going to say one more thing. There is like, when you go to the website, you see all this mapped out. Like there's a really explicit like code of conduct around like, you don't touch anybody without their permission, right? Like, so you don't have to worry about people groping you or grabbing you or like saying something to you unsolicited. Like it really is I found it to feel like a very affirming and safe space for me.
Girl, I'm already on the website. I've been looking at this.
Listen, schedule. They're good. I've gone at least 3 years. I think I didn't go I think I went 2018, 2019. I think I missed 2020, but I was there 2021, 2022, and I'll be back there this year.
Okay, y'all. I'm looking at the schedule. One of the topics is cuff it. How anti-Southern sentiment, respectability politics, and anti-abortion views make freedom impossible. Y'all, like,
listen, it's like Black liberation through Black pleasure. Pleasure as a liberatory practice.
Okay. I can't go this year because of my schedule, but y'all might send me there next year.
They'll be there every year. And they've ventured out a little bit. Like I think they did one in like maybe Miami or something this summer.
I see that on the site,
and then I think they did one like in maybe New Mexico. They had like a southwest one or something like that. But like the flagship one is in Atlanta, but they've ventured out a little bit to some other places.
Okay.
And it was going to that, I mean, it's networking like anything else. So like I went to that conference and that's where I met one of the people that I worked with as like a sex coach. I met people who do professional, like sensual impact play and kink and BDSM stuff. Like I met all of those people who are now like in my circle of people at Sex Down South.
Okay. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm looking at their Southwest Love Fest. Look at this.
Oh, and they have like what they call a healing room where they have people who do like Reiki or like professional cuddlers if you just need to be held, or like massage, like, you know, short 15-minute massage. So they have like a healing room that's included. And so there's not an additional fee. It's like included in your registration fee if you just need to like go and decompress and get like some quiet time or be cuddled or be massaged or get some energy work. So they're really thoughtful about like how it's like they've been doing it for a while and it's a solid, it's well organized, stuff runs on time, right? Like it's good.
Okay. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds amazing. And I really love that you have your program coming up. Your programs, because there's 3 coming up, right? Walk us through
There's
3.
3. So we have High Achievers is happening in August. High Achievers is in August. That one's launching in August. Happily Unmarried is launching in September. And then Erotic Empowerment is launching in October for National Kink Month in October. So those programs are all rolling out. And again, these are the self-paced programs. I'll be starting coaching sessions again in 2024, but I'm not doing any more coaching right now because I'm trying to take a break and rest from my sabbatical.
Yeah. Now on the 8th, you're announcing something?
Yes, so I'm going to have a special announcement for the High Achievers program on the 8th. So if you go to my website and sign up for my email list, then you'll get it. Or if you follow me on social media, I guess I can put that in the chat.
I don't think you can drop it in the chat.
I can't.
Drop
okay, so my social media is
private chat, and I'll.
Okay, perfect. But I'll announce it on my social media too. So I'm at Catherine S. Bell on IG and on Twitter. And so I'm just going to have a special like rollout October 8th pricing for the High Achievers going out on the 8th. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, so practicing resting more and doing lots of pleasure-filled things for sure.
What haven't you told us that we need to talk about?
I feel like we talked about all the things. We talked about my programs, High Achievers, Happily Unmarried, Erotic Empowerment. They really do go together because I find like, again, for high achieving Black women, a lot of times we're doing all the things, we're disconnected from our joy, we're disconnected from our pleasure. We're in relationships that we need to let go of and just need permission to release it so it doesn't feel like a failure. And then also permission, again, to pleasure through erotic empowerment. So like really reflecting on doing the deprogramming around family of origin narratives, social narratives, religious narratives. So we've talked about all that. A lot of people put in the chat things that they do for joy and pleasure. So I think that's good. You guys have my website, you have my social media. So, and then I'm also in the Facebook group, so y'all can holler at me in those groups too.
Yes, Dr. Bell is part of my program From Burnout to Bliss, which you can get at from burnouttobliss.co, where we get together and I tell her, that's not a break, girl. That's not a break.
That's not a break. What you said last time I was in, so I'm in a hotel now, but the last time I was at home in Savannah where my bookshelf, like my whole house is basically a library. And Sheeta was like, girl, like, where are you? Like, you still surrounded by books. And I'm like, I'm always going to be surrounded by books. Like, books are my companions.
She gave up Pennsylvania and moved to Georgia, but then
those books are still there.
And like, there's like, I get it. I get that is a relaxing thing for you, but
yeah,
I think a lot of us probably need to think about this when like the way you relax and the way you work
Are the same. Yeah.
are the same or so
Yeah.
tightly intertwined.
hmm You've
How
helped
do
me with that a
you?
lot. Yeah, you've helped me with that a lot.
Yeah.
Because I mean, one of the questions that you asked was like, you were like, okay, what are you doing on your break that you don't think is work, but that somebody else would think of as work? And so, like, because I read and write and I love reading and writing, it's like taking a break from doing the reading and writing is like I do have to be intentional about not always picking up a book or not always writing. Um, and then I tried to differentiate between like academic publication, right? Because you asked an interesting question, like, okay, because I was like, well, this is pleasure reading versus work reading. You're like, okay, how do you differentiate between pleasure reading and work reading? And I was like, oh, well, when I'm work reading, I'm usually reading toward writing an article or something like that. So I'm like, I'm taking meticulous notes. I have like annotations, all of this kind of stuff. But I realized like I pleasure read the same way. And even when I go into a book, pleasure reading, it turns into an article, right? Like, so the latest book that I picked up for pleasure reading is Maya Angelou's The Heart of a Woman. And like, I'm already like, I can write 3 articles on this book because of this, this, and this, right? And so it's like, how do I just read it and then we'll probably later write about it. So it means I'm going to have to front load more of like the going to the beach and the nature walks and the things that don't involve reading and writing in order to like get a break from that stuff that I do, even though it does give me a lot of joy and pleasure, but it is still work. But you know where I don't take books? Sex Down South.
Okay, but because I was just gonna say, you know, you're gonna take a book to the beach, like you're gonna take.
Yeah, I do take books to the book. Yeah, I do. I have pictures
I
of
know.
me reading Audre Lorde's a biography of Audre Lorde called Warrior Poet when I was in Mexico. Actually, I was reading that on the beach. And also, even at Sex Down South, they have a book exhibit. So I always buy books while I'm there, even though I don't read them while I'm there, but I do buy books when I'm there.
You should be doing other things when you're there. Stay away from them books.
Yeah. I mean, I'm doing other things too.
All right.
Both and.
Both and. I wanted to make sure we saw this comment because I think it's really important. And that is, it's evident watching you that I'm not showing up as my full self, right? Like you're allowing women to see this and to get that reflection, right? There remains remnants of my life masking that I need to lay aside, of a life masking that I lay aside. Yes.
Yes, I love that. Yes, to showing up as your full self.
Yes.
And giving yourself permission to do that. And yes, to like taking off the mask and taking off the layers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Dr. Bell.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say it's what we were saying earlier. Like it always feels good for me to show up as my full self and like put things out there because it gives other people permission to do the same thing. And I think there is something, you know, I mean, it's what's beautiful about this community too. Yeah.
Have you attended Exodus Summit before?
I have. So I did the one in Mexico.
You did the meetup, yes. Yes.
I did the meetup in Mexico, and then I did the virtual one this past year.
Okay.
But that was in the fall or the spring. I don't remember. Time is like collapsing on me. And then I got the recordings for the 2021 one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, we announced our tickets for 2023.
I saw that
on
yesterday, Friday.
Octavia Rahim is going to come in.
Yes, and that's another Black yogi. I think she's based in Atlanta too.
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
So excited about her because when she talks about rest and when she talks about joy, it's like mainline that into my neck. Just get it up. Just get it in here. Put the needle in. Like,
yeah.
It's so good. It is so good to hear her talk about rest. And so authentically, you can tell she embodies, like even just meeting with her, she embodies the practices that I want more of in my life.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited about that.
Yes.
We're super excited about Dr. Joy coming and talking about sisterhood. This year is going to be amazing. Stephanie just reminded me that all access tickets are halfway sold out. So if you wanted to get an all access pass, an early bird, you can always get an all access pass, but to get the early bird,
ones,
that is selling out. So we hope those of you that are interested in this topic and are interested in freedom and finding your own freedom will attend Exodus Summit because we are getting to the core of the freedom this year. Like we want you to have it. We want you to find it. We want you to hold it. And we have more speakers coming soon. I'm very excited about what this is going to look like for the women, like the women who attend and are on the back end of it. what that looks like for them. So
Yeah.
I need like
Yeah.
I'm also trying so hard not to announce some things accidentally.
Right. No, yeah, don't announce, don't give it up too soon. I remember I think Stephanie posted on IG like, I can't wait. Like we still got a couple of hours. I'm trying not to spill the beans yet.
Try
But
not to
I will
spill the
say for
beans.
me, the Exodus Summit space, even listen to the recordings before I went to the one in last summer, it accelerated my exit, right? My process. It definitely did. And I told her, so I had a coaching client whose therapist was like, oh, check out Stephanie and Sheeta, right? And so like her therapist shared it with her, she shared it with me, and then I like jumped on and I was like, oh yeah. And like again, the things that resonated with me was like the naming of the problematic of the Black excellence narrative,
Mm-hmm.
the working twice as hard to get half as far, and this idea that Black women are constantly put in this space of like giving to everybody else and operating at the highest, you know, the perfectionism and everything else, and like it's exhausting us and stressing us out and killing us prematurely. So what does it mean to, you know, step into something different? Oh, you know what else I love? Like when Stephanie at the one last year, not the one in Mexico, but the virtual one, when you guys were introducing yourselves, Stephanie would always say like, hi, I'm Stephanie Perry. And, you know, she would say like, I run the house sitter school and I do as little as possible. Right. And like literally making that part of your introduction, like as an academic, when you're getting introduced, it's always like, she wrote all of these books and she did all of this and it's just like, and people are like, oh my goodness, it's Supermom. And when do you sleep? Like there's this glorification of the grind and hustle of that kind of bio. But for Stephanie to like be really intentional, well, like I do as little as possible. I'm like, so then my friend and I started rewriting our bios. Like, this is Catherine Sophia Bell. She takes frequent naps and walks in the park, right? And takes, you know, rest or whatever, to really shift what we put the value on. So it's not always about being achievement oriented or kind of as part of your identity.
And doing that, like even just rewriting your bio and having one other person sees it gives one other person permission to do it, right? Like
Absolutely.
everybody who sees it says like, oh, you know what I mean? Like when I talk about not doing a lot of work, there are people who are like, I could never, but there are always people who are like, oh, that's okay.
Yeah,
Like I don't
exactly. It gives people permission to do
it
it.
gives people permission to do it themselves.
Well, and I think what also is powerful is when you've done whatever the thing is that people perceive to be the highest thing, like when you have whatever degrees or whatever certifications or you've had whatever C-suite jobs, like when you've done that and you like, girl, ain't nothing for you up here. Like do what you want to do. And my thing is like, if you want to do that and you know you want to do that, then go for it. But if you're doing that thinking it's going to give you some type of like some credential is going to give you some type of validation in the world, like it's not, right? Like
Yeah.
we're, you know, so I think part of it is like people who've done it and chose to walk away. Like I actually just did an interview that I'll release that will be coming out soon where like somebody was asking me, like a junior faculty member was like, you were at the top of your game. Like you were about to go out for full professor. You had all the things, like what made you walk away from everything that everybody else is like seeking after? And I think there is something powerful about like demystifying that somehow when you get to whatever level, then it gets better. It's just to walk away, choosing yourself and choosing to walk away and creating your best life without it being tied to institutional structures. I think it's important.
I think it's also important to a certain point to like look at why, specifically women, if you're a woman, why women walk away. When I was in law school and I interviewed at a law firm, in the department I was looking at, there were, I think, 3 women there. And when the first day I started, so I started maybe 6 months later, there were no women in the department.
They had all left. They'd run them all away. Yeah.
They'd all left. And I knew it was problematic, but I didn't realize how, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, this, like, because I'm never going to walk into a situation and be like, oh, well, I guess they couldn't cut it. It was more like, there's something.
It's not about
something happening. Yes, there's something
in the
here.
System.
And
there is something in that space.
Right. But like, as a super junior person who needed a job, I was like, okay, I'll see what I can do. Right. I was like, all right, like I understand that there's something happening here. I can't identify it. I'm just going to try to be different. And girl, I wasn't different.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
I wasn't.
Well, and sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, I think the other thing is like oftentimes we, instead of assuming there's something wrong with the relationship we're in or the job that we have, we'll internalize, well, what's wrong with me? Harder, or how can I do better, instead of being like, oh, the issue is them, it's not me. And so we'll try to work harder to like earn the love or the respect or whatever of like a partner or of coworkers, when like it's like they're going to keep showing up as long as they can exploit your labor. And then when you stop giving your labor to be exploited, that's when things shift. You know what I mean? So it's like, as long as you're given the thing that they can benefit from, like they're going to stay around. But when you withdraw those services, then you'll see, you know, how the shifts happen. But yeah.
What that law firm, my same department, none of the men left. Those men were still there.
Chilling.
All the women left. And I was like, there's something
There's something here. And it's not the women's fault.
It's not. It's not. And I knew it wasn't, but because I didn't know what the problem was, I was like, maybe it'll be different.
Maybe it'll be different. No, it's the same across the board.
It was worse.
Well, and I think it's also, well, I was gonna say, it's also the example of like, we will also try to pivot and shift and see what we can do differently, right? So it's just like, oh, well, maybe it's, you know, maybe if I go, like, what I love about you saying is like, you knew if you went to a different law firm, it would just be like, same play with a different cast of characters, right? Like, it's like, I know how this story ends. And so, you know, I reached the point where I tried a bunch of different positions in the academy. Like I did the professor thing consistently. Department, I had been a department head, I had been a center director, I had been director of graduate studies. Like I had all of those leadership positions, and like everything was just like, nope, this still doesn't work. Nope, this still doesn't work. No. So again, I was good at all of those things, but none of them brought me any more joy or pleasure. And so it was just like, oh no, it's just time for me to leave this thing, right? So, so yeah, give yourself permission to exit all the things that are not working for you.
Because the time we put in trying to fix the unfixable, and even if it's not unfixable, that's not a reason.
It's not your job to fix it. Yeah.
Right. The time we spend in trying to do that could be spent seeking joy and pleasure in other places. Right. Absolutely. And finding it easily.
Right. Well, and also trusting your lived experience and expertise, right? So whatever it took you to get whatever position you have now that you dislike, you can translate that, you can leverage those skills, you can apply those skills to doing something different that's more aligned for you, right? And so sometimes you can just feel so stuck of like, well, I trained to be a lawyer, or I trained to be a medical doctor, or I trained to be a professor, and this is the only thing that I can do. But it's like, no, the skills, like I'm sure you still utilize skills that you gained as an attorney and the work that you do now, but you're doing work that's more purpose-centered and pleasure-centered for you, right? So like those skills are always transferable and leverageable. And I think sometimes we don't trust places.
I'll call it a comment I saw from Sharice earlier, and that was that every time she left a city, a job, a man behind, her life leveled up. And I think that's
facts.
It's true for, I would say, almost all of us, but we're constantly told it's not true. We're constantly told
don't believe the hype.
It cannot happen. Like this is as good as it gets. And you're sitting here and it's not good, right? If it's not good, it's not as good as it gets. Right.
It's not exactly.
It's not good. It cannot be as good as it gets.
Yeah. It's the fear that it may be as good as it gets, but it's like, but that's why I think it's important to have examples of people who have left marriages or who have left other relationships or who have left jobs and they're living their best life. Like I have zero regrets about leaving my marriage. I have zero regrets about leaving my job. Like it's only been amazing things that have happened after those decisions, because again, like other things align. When my energy wasn't being sucked out of me for things that were not aligned, I felt more energized. And it also meant that I could then redirect that energy to things that were more, purpose-centered, pleasure-centered, fulfilling for me.
Okay. I am so glad you joined me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to see you guys. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for listening. And thanks for having me. I've enjoyed talking all things high achievers, happy, and quitting.
I mean, it's got such a negative connotation, but truly quitting is the answer to so many of our problems.
It really is.
Identifying what you need to quit and quitting that thing, whether that's people pleasing or I don't know, doing the carpool or whatever it is. Like there's something in
Super,
your life you
super,
need to
super
quit.
womaning, super wifing,
Yes.
super momming, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Something in your life you
It's,
need to quit right now. Go ahead and quit
yeah,
it.
let it go.
Let this
Yeah.
be permission and get it done.
Right. Yeah. It's not a failure on your part to quit something.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
it's in fact, there's an amount of strength that you need to quit something that
Right.
I think a lot of us that is it's ignored a lot of the time, right? That like
Mm-hmm.
in order to walk away from something you've committed to takes
Right.
a lot of strength.
It
And
takes a
this
lot
is
of strength.
something that we should celebrate in certain ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we should be
Mm-hmm.
having more divorce parties because girl,
Absolutely,
welcome,
because it's
right?
amazing. It's amazing. And I think the thing is sometimes it's again connecting to you and what you want and what you need, and then what are your fears of what other people think? Because like other
Mhm.
people aren't living in your situation. Other people
No,
are not, dealing with
no.
whatever. So I think sometimes we do things to keep up appearances for other people or fear of what other people will think. But a lot of times, again, other people will actually be proud of you, happy for you. Did you hear that? Did I go away?
You went away. I heard
I was
proud of
saying
you, happy for you, and then you went away.
oh, and then ask you what's the blueprint so that they can do it too. Because they're like, because they're going along, because you're going along, and then they're like, oh, well, I thought you were happy. And you're like, no, I'm miserable. And they're like, oh, girl, I'm miserable too. Like, how can we,
Right.
how can
I
we
listen,
stop the craziness and keep it moving?
I will never forget that one of the turning parts for me in my practice was when that the head of my department, head of an entire law firm, took me out to breakfast, and because he heard I wasn't happy, and these are his words: "I heard you were unhappy. Well, every associate's unhappy. You just got to deal with it." And I was like,
That's just how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
"A life, a life of unhappiness until you decide to promote me from associate to partner. So I'm unhappy. I'm going to be unhappy until you
Until you decide that you're going to
until
promote
you
me. And then
decide
there's
you're going to
just
promote
more
me."
unhappiness on the other side of that.
And then partners don't
Hmm.
look happy. Then partners do
Hmm.
not look happy.
They don't.
And
Hmm.
you're telling me you don't care about my unhappiness. So you know I'm
Right.
unhappy and you don't care about the fact that I'm unhappy. And I just need to
Hmm.
suck it up until you tell me when. I said, oh, this can't be
Mm-mm.
this. No, no. If your solution is suck up the pain, it's not. If someone is telling you that the answer to your problem is to grin and bear it, suck up the pain, get out
Yeah.
and ignore that person.
That, right. Get out
Block their number.
expeditiously.
Block
Yeah.
them. Yes.
Mm, mm,
Well,
mm.
thank you again for being here with us. I'm very, very
My pleasure.
excited. You guys
Yay.
look at Catherine's programs and join them. Meet her
Yay.
down
Thank you.
there.
I look.
Listen, I
Yes.
feel like
Yes.
this kind of became a Sex Down South ad.
It became a success of that, which that's also a Black queer run organization. So I'm like happy to support them. And I mean, I think again, like it's important to also shout out the spaces that help us make our
Mhm.
transitions and transformations, right? Like so, Exodus Summits is part of that. Burnout to Bliss is part of that. Sex Down South for me is part of that. So yeah, I'll be there and get your life at Sex Down South and then get your life with Erotic Empowerment and Happily Unmarried and
Yes.
High Achievers too.
Yes. And then get your life with Exodus Summit. This year is going to be so like the announcements we
Yes.
have coming.
I'm excited. I'm already excited, you know.
All
But
right,
this is
y'all.
also one of the things, it's just like, even if you didn't have a lineup, you just show up because you know it's gonna be fire,
Yeah.
whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like it can't not be fire. And so it's just like adding fuel to the fire, every announcement of like who else is gonna be there. But it's not gonna be good. Like that's impossible. It's gonna be great, always.
It's funny. Stephanie and I were debating about whether we should do the announcement on Friday because we plan on doing it earlier this week and we didn't happen. And we keep getting pushed back by people. Keep
Hmm.
getting pushbacks. We're like, do we announce or do we wait? At a certain point, we're like, the women just want to buy a ticket. They don't really care. Like they care about
Right.
speaking, but they also don't care. Like they just want the opportunity to buy the ticket. So let's just do that, and then
Right.
we'll announce as we get more everything lined up.
Right.
But
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
my travel goddess, in the chat there is a link to Dr. Oh, that's her. The link to her Instagram is coming up now, and I'll drop the link to her website where you can see her programs. If you get on her email list, you will see. Boop, boop, boop. If you get on her email list, you'll get an announcement on Friday.
On
No,
the 8th, which I think
Tuesday.
is Tuesday. Yeah,
Tuesday.
Tuesday the 8th. Yeah, it's like the
about,
Lionsgate portal, so I like the astrology stuff too.
yes.
So yeah, I'll send out an email, and on my IG, I'll put an announcement about what special offers I have for the high achievers in August.
Yes. So join her email list, because you'll also be announcing all of your other programs to your email list as well, right? So get on her website, get on the email list, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for joining us, and thanks again for having me.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thanks for showing up and for being so supportive. If you haven't already, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel. And I will see you guys next Sunday. Bye.